So Netflix's Daredevil ran for 3 seasons from 2015 to 2018 and then was unfortunately cancelled due to a bunch of different reasons. Recently though, earlier on this year, we got a successor revival show in the shape of Daredevil Born Again. But something I thought would be really fun to do would be to go over every single character that is mentioned or referenced or shows up in Netflix's Daredevil that is also an existing Marvel Comics character. So in this video, I'm going to go in episode order, so from episode 1 of season 1 all the way to episode 13 of season 3, talk about the characters that appear or are referenced in the show, then talk about their comic book history a little bit, and then a bit about their on-screen history too. So any other Marvel TV show or movie, live action or animated that they appear in, as well as a bit of their comic book history. I'm also going to briefly talk about where they've been mentioned as well, which was really fun to research. Like, I actually learned a lot. Like, the one thing I found out that I had no idea about was that so many Marvel Comics characters actually exist in the Spider-Man Sam Raimi universe because they're mentioned inside the 2002 Spider-Man novel. Like, that book apparently just mentions tons of big heroes, which means that they exist in Tobey Maguire's universe. I don't know, I found that kind of cool. Probably most people don't. I did. But anyway, this is a slightly different, slightly longer formatted video than I've done on the channel before. I actually did a similar video for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. back in 2020, and the video did pretty well, but my problem with it was that I intended on doing it in parts because it was taking so long to make. So I did the first part, covered like 10 characters, never followed up on it, and I still regularly get comments on that video asking where is part 2. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about that. But I decided if I'm going to do this again, I need to just do it in one video. So I would really love to do more videos like this, but due to the time and effort that this video alone took to put together, like a literal week of research before I even could start scripting it, and then when I did start scripting it, it took even longer. So due to that effort, seeing more of these kind of videos would very much depend on how well this video does. Like, I would love to cover Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. properly and do the entire show in one video. I'd love to do the other Netflix shows. I'd love to do the MCU movies. I'd love to even do DC ones like Smallville or the Arrowverse. Like, that would be really fun. So if you enjoy this video and you would like to see more videos like this, then make sure to share it, make sure to subscribe, make sure to comment if you enjoyed it, and comment what other TV show or movies you would like to see me tackle with this. But really quick, some basic ground rules for what exactly this is and what exactly counts for this. So this is recorded way after the fact, but there will be moments where the audio will just change really suddenly. That'll be because I'm recording something last second, or where I made a mistake or something in the video and I'm like, no, that thing's not actually true. So I fix it, maybe I mentioned a wrong episode or a wrong year or something. I'll record over it and put it in. But also, originally this video was going to include entire entries for characters who were mentioned or referenced in the show. So like some of the Avengers are mentioned, like Hulk, Captain America, Thor, Iron Man, some of the Defenders like Iron Fist, Luke Cage, Jessica Jones. Unfortunately, if I included them in full entries the way I'm doing with characters like Daredevil, this video would be 3-4 hours long and just impossible to edit and impossible to make. So I'm going to mention the characters that are referenced and be like, oh yeah, these are comic book characters who are referenced really quickly, like 20 seconds on them. But I'm not going to give them full entries. If you want to see full entries on them, then, maybe tell me what other movies or series you want me to cover on this, and I'll give them full entries then. But this is just a last minute sort of side note to let you guys know that the video is constantly changing while I'm making it.
If you had an iron suit or a magic hammer, maybe that would explain why you keep getting your asses handed to you.
And that obviously refers to Tony Stark or to Thor, so they're on here because of that. Or there's like a picture in the background that might have the Hulk on it, and that also counts in my opinion. Similarly, sometimes a comic book organization gets mentioned, and the organization in the comics might be mostly related to one particular character, so I include that character here because I think it technically counts as a mention. Some of these characters have an immensely huge comic book history, so obviously I'm not going to talk about everything that happened with them in the comics and mostly just summarize some of their bigger history moments and just kind of give like a broad look down or cooler comic book moments in arcs, stuff like that. Some of the characters on this list actually have very small comic book histories, and it required a lot of effort just to find out when their first appearance was. Take Wilson Fisk's family, for example, like his parents. The Marvel Wiki entry doesn't, like the Marvel Wiki fandom that has every character ever, doesn't even have entries for them. But they are comic book characters. So I had to go and find out exactly when their first appearance was and find those issues and find out when the years probably were and kind of work from there. It required a lot of effort to kind of put this together. is what I'm saying. So yeah, brief comic book history and brief on-screen history for each character. I do cover every single place they've ever appeared in outside of the comics when it comes to a TV show or movie, but I won't go completely in depth on each one. I'll just kind of mention they showed up here, this is who they were played by, this is maybe a little bit about what happened with them in this. Anyway, I hope you learned some fun facts from this. I hope you learned some Marvel lore you didn't know before, so sit back, relax. This will take a while, and also remember there will be spoilers for all 3 seasons of Marvel's Netflix Daredevil, and there'll also be spoilers for Daredevil Born Again Season 1, because some of the stuff I have to talk about characters, you kind of have to relate it to what we just saw in Born Again. So there's spoilers for all that stuff, so bear that in mind. But I'm going to start off by immediately breaking my "this is an episode order" rule, because there is one character in the show who is technically not a pre-existing Marvel comic book character, but he made their first appearance in the show and then afterwards was brought into the comics.
Everybody we know is making twice what we are, writing for blogs, working from home in their underwear. We're hanging on by our fingertips, Ben.
And that character is Mitchell Ellison. And Mitchell Ellison is played by Jeffrey Cantor and first appeared in Season 1, Episode 3 of Daredevil, which aired in April 2015. If you don't remember him, he started as a kind of thorn in Ben Urich's side of the New York Bulletin, who was the editor-in-chief of the newspaper, and he was that guy that was always shutting Ben down when Ben wanted to investigate Fisk and everything surrounding him in Season 1. After Ben Urich's death in late Season 1, Mitchell became a much more sympathetic character and was way more about journalistic integrity. He was helping Karen Page on stories like Frank Castle and his trial in Season 2. Then this continued in Season 3 when Wilson Fisk was released from prison, and that whole story started with both Mitchell and Karen being terrified now that Fisk was out, but willing and ready to fight through the newspaper, and they wanted to get the facts out there. Shortly after this, Benjamin Poindexter, aka Bullseye, attacks the Bulletin dressed as Daredevil and attacks and injures Mitchell pretty heavily. Mitchell's story in the Daredevil show ends with him and Karen watching Ray Nadim's final video, who was the FBI agent murdered by Bullseye, and then Mitchell's final scene in the show is him attending the funeral of Father Paul Lantom, who was also murdered by Bullseye. God damn, man, Bullseye was such a menace in the season. He was just killing people nonstop, and that continued in Born Again. Crazy character. In the comics, Mitchell Ellison has actually not appeared, but we know he exists because he was mentioned in Kingpin issue 4 from May of 2017, which came out after Daredevil Season 2, but before Daredevil Season 3. In that issue, which was the only mention of him in any comic that I could find, he is said to be the current editor-in-chief of the Comicbook New York Bulletin as well. Whether he will show up in any other comics remains to be seen, but it is pretty cool that his legacy has already existed outside of the Netflix show. In terms of his other on-screen appearances, he's only been mentioned or appeared in places that are also part of the Netflix corner of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He made 2 appearances in Season 1 of The Punisher, in both episodes 2 and 9, which was in November of 2017, so about 6 months after he was mentioned in the comics. Both times he showed up were tied to Karen's plot in the show, and outside of this, he had also had 2 brief mentions in both Iron Fist and The Defenders. In his mention in Iron Fist was because he was sending a reporter to research the fact that Danny Rand had just come back from the dead. But now that we've got the one character out of the way who jumped from the show into the comics, and not vice versa, we can properly jump into Season 1 with Episode 1, and the first character I'm going to talk about is pretty obvious.
I don't get to choose who I am. I'm Daredevil. Not even God can stop that now.
Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, is played by Charlie Cox and appears in all 39 episodes of the Netflix show. Inside the show, when Matt was 9 years old, he saved an old man from pushing him out of the way, and in doing so was hit by a truck that came from the Rand Corporation, which may sound familiar to Iron Fist fans. After this, he was blinded by the chemicals from said truck and given heightened senses and a new way of looking at the world. Shortly after this, his dad, Jack Murdock, was murdered for not throwing a fight, and Matt, who was an orphan and didn't know where his mother was placed in St. Agnes Orphanage, which also might sound familiar to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fans as the orphanage that Daisy Johnson or Skye grew up in. After some time in the orphanage, Matt became known to a man named Stick, who began to teach Matt how to use his new abilities and not think the world was over just because he couldn't see the way he used to. Stick and Matt's partnership didn't last long, however, because Stick was kind of a dick. He and Matt went his own way, connecting with characters like Father Paul Lantom, connecting with his fate a bit more. Matt then eventually went to college and met Foggy Nelson. Both became lawyers together around this college time, and Matt met Elektra around then as well and got into trouble with her, eventually starting his vigilante work and opening Nelson and Murdock with Foggy. Throughout season 1, he goes after Wilson Fisk and the Hand. In season 2, he goes after the Punisher and again the Hand. And in season 3, he once again goes after Kingpin, aka Wilson Fisk, along with Bullseye. In the comics, Matt Murdock first appeared in Daredevil issue 1 from February 1964, and this comic established so much about what we know about the characters still today, with Nelson and Murdock, Foggy, Karen, Jack Murdock, and Hell's Kitchen already being day one foundations of the character. Matt also wore a yellow and red outfit in his early appearances that was homaged in his outfit that he wore in She-Hulk Attorney at Law. Matt's origin in the Netflix series is actually extremely similar to his origin in the comics. In the first issue, his dad's a boxer who is forced to sign up for some dodgy fights in order to keep getting paid. Well, Matt saves an old man from crossing the road and gets chemicals in his eyes, blinding him just like in the show. Jack refuses to throw a fight and is killed for it, just like the show. Matt goes to school with Foggy and they create their own law firm and hire a secretary named Karen Page, again, just like the show. So it is really cool how little changed in the show compared to the comic. Like, I feel like it translates really well. Unlike the Netflix version of the character, however, Daredevil in the comics was immediately very much a part of the wider Marvel universe. His second issue in April of 1964 had Daredevil fight the Spider-Man villain Elektra, had him meet the entire Fantastic Four, had Elektra telling Daredevil that he had no chance against a Spider-Man villain, and Daredevil was pretty immediately not the grounded hero that the Netflix show paints him as. That stuff came a lot later in the comics. Matt's first appearance outside of his own comics came very quickly in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 16 in June of 1964, when he, along with Foggy and Karen, showed up, and in this issue, the villain, the Ringmaster, hypnotizes Spider-Man and makes him attack Daredevil, which was kind of a running thing in 1960s Marvel comics. Superheroes meet for the first time, they're gonna fight. I mean, sure, don't you want to see them fight? Over the next set of issues in Daredevil, Matt is put up against characters like the Owl, who appears in the show, Kilgrave, who Jessica Jones fans will be familiar with, even fighting Namor the Submariner in issue 7, which is the first issue where Matt wears his iconic dark red costume, and this happened in February 1965, so exactly a year after he first showed up in the comics. Continuing on from that for the next year, he battles more well-known supervillains like Stiltman, the Organization, until Spider-Man first crosses over to Daredevil's comics in Daredevil issue 16, which was a whole 2 years after his first appearance, and this happened in March of 1966. Spider-Man sticks around for a little while into issue 17, kind of establishing their friendly hero dynamic, and in issue 18, Matt faces off against the Gladiator, another big character from the show. Now time for one of those story arcs that reminds you that it was the 1960s and things were weird and different, because in issue 24, Karen seemingly discovers a letter left from Spider-Man where it reveals that Matt Murdock is in fact Daredevil. So to avoid this, Daredevil takes on the persona of Mike Murdock, who is his fake twin brother, and he tells Karen and Foggy, No, I'm not Daredevil. My twin brother I've never mentioned before until right this second and looks just like me, Mike Murdock. That's Daredevil. That's who you're looking for. And believe it or not, they keep this story going for a year, from January 1967 until April 1968 in issue 41, almost 20 issues that this storyline goes on for. One thing to note about this, however, is that in Daredevil season 1, when Matt and Claire first meet, Claire says that she's just going to call Matt Mike because Matt won't give her name, or give her his name, so I guess that's, a little Easter egg reference to this weird moment from the comics. Another side note, though, is that Mike did eventually become a real character in the comics from 2019 until 2022 as a real physical manifestation of Matt's Mike persona turned into a real character. But back to the 1960s, and in issue 30, it takes a bit of an interesting turn when Matt dresses up as Thor until the real Thor shows up and, you've guessed it, they fight. Around issues 37 through 38, Matt has some serious tangles with Doctor Doom. Following on from similar situations with Spider-Man and Thor, Captain America shows up in issue 43. Guess what happened? Go on, guess. Did you say they fight? If you did, you're a winner. In issue 57, in a reveal that is very reminiscent of the Daredevil season 2 finale, Matt reveals his identity to Karen, which forces the relationship of the two to take a not so great turn. Jumping ahead to the 1970s, Daredevil had some major changes in writers and thus saw some major shakeups. In issue 81 from August 1971, the Daredevil series saw the addition of Natasha Romanoff, aka the Black Widow. And around issue 84 is when Matt and Natasha begin to have sort of a romance. One of the more iconic Marvel romantic pairings that actually has never really been done in live action. This does turn into a bit of a love triangle in the following issue 85 when Matt and Karen are still a thing and Natasha is sad about it, and love drama, which is when in issue 86 Matt and Karen are supposed to be married and then that all blows up. Following issue 86, there are huge changes to the status quo of Daredevil as a character. He actually moves from Hell's Kitchen in New York to San Francisco with Black Widow. Karen Page stops being a regular Daredevil character and isn't seen in Marvel Comics again for years. Even Foggy's appearances hugely decrease after this appearance, and he doesn't really become a consistent Daredevil character again until the mid-1970s. Issue 92 in October 1972 began this relatively brief period of Daredevil, where his comic was even renamed to Daredevil and the Black Widow, really showing how integral these two characters were to each other and how tied together they were. Like, she was basically the main character along with Daredevil. In issue 99, Hawkeye, aka Clint Barton, had just quit the Avengers, so he shows up in San Francisco expecting Natasha to get together with him again, until Clint realizes Daredevil is now with Natasha, and you know what happens? They fight. At this point, Daredevil has pretty much fought every single Marvel hero. Daredevil issue 108 in November of 1973 is the first issue to drop the Daredevil and Black Widow title, but Natasha does remain a part of the comic. It's also around this time that Matt starts being somewhat romantically tied to the character of Moondragon, which Black Widow isn't crazy about, and this causes some issues between the two of them. Matt leaves San Francisco and returns to New York, breaking up with Black Widow, in doing so, all in issue 117 from October of 1974. This led to Natasha, aka Black Widow, leaving in Daredevil issue 124, and after this, Daredevil as a character returned to Hell's Kitchen. With this, a new era for the character began, and in issue 126, two pretty important Daredevil characters made their debut. Heather Glenn, who people familiar with the recent Daredevil Born Again season are probably pretty familiar with, and Blake Tower, who is a character in the Netflix series. It was also around this time that Matt first faced off against Bullseye. Ultimately, though, there is more relationship drama, a bit of a love triangle with Heather, Black Widow, and Matt, and when Natasha returns for a handful of issues. But Matt chooses Heather over Natasha. Now moving on to the 1980s, and it isn't until the early 1980s, almost 20 years after Daredevil was created, that Kingpin finally becomes a character who is seen as one of Daredevil's villains. In the early 1980s, Daredevil and Matt Murdock are once again heavily changed, but this time to reflect the changing tone in comics in both DC and Marvel at the time. Characters like Elektra are introduced. Matt becomes a much more darker toned character, far more reminiscent of what we see in the Netflix series. There's a huge change in the backstory of Jack Murdock, where he becomes a man who physically abused Matt as a child. Daredevil and Matt start becoming somewhat more of an anti-hero than a full-on superhero, so a lot of big changes. And once Elektra was introduced, more staples of the character, such as Stick, the Hand, the Chase, Matt's current fighting style, they all really did fall into place. Around this time, Matt as a character really goes off the deep end. In issue 181 from December 1981, Bullseye learns who Matt Murdock really is, and Bullseye then goes after the current woman that Matt cares about, Elektra, even killing her. So Matt tries to kill Bullseye by throwing him off a building in a sequence in the comic that is very, very, very similar in tone-wise and stake-wise to what we see in Daredevil Born Again Episode 1. Following this, Matt straight up goes to the hospital that Bullseye is being kept in with a gun and tries to play Russian roulette with the man. He just brings in a gun. Now, it's unloaded to be fair, but he brings in a gun and plays Russian roulette with Bullseye. That really gives you an idea of the kind of character Matt Murdock is during this era. You know, you don't see Spider-Man doing this stuff, you don't see Captain America doing this stuff, but Matt Murdock, he's gonna do this stuff. Right after this arc is also the first time that Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, first shows up in a Daredevil comic. And this all leads to issue 183 and 184, when Frank and Matt cross paths over how to deal with drug runners. Cover of issue 184 with Matt holding Frank Castle's gun is referenced in season 2 episode 3 of the Netflix series, one of my favorite shots of the whole show. This whole mini storyline in general is very much part of what inspired some of the early season 2 episodes of the show. The Hand, Bullseye, Foggy, Kingpin, Black Widow, Heather, and even engagement of her and Matt, Ben Urich, the Yakuza, Grotto, Turk Barrett, all of these are main fixtures of Matt's character for the next 4 years until late 1985, when probably the most iconic and well-known Daredevil comic book story takes place, Born Again. The story that season 3 of the Netflix series is based on, and the story that the Disney Plus show is named after. In issue 227, Karen Page returns after being absent from Daredevil for almost 100 issues. The story really does kick off when Karen Page, at the end of her rope after a string of bad luck, sends Matt Murdock's identity as Daredevil. This information reaches Kingpin, who begins completely upending Matt's life. And Matt's life is ultimately ruined and forces him into some of the darkest places he's ever been. There's a scene from the comic that is very similar to Daredevil Season 3 Episode 4 after Matt gets out of the prison. In the comic, Matt is badly beaten by Kingpin and thrown into a taxi that is sent off the pier into the river. Just like the series, Matt eventually is saved by his mother and realizes she's still alive, and there is someone who dresses up like Daredevil and goes after Karen and Foggy, but unlike the series, in the comics, it's not Bullseye. Kingpin uses the supervillain Nuke, who Jessica Jones fans might be familiar with from that show, to attack Hell's Kitchen, forcing Matt to respond as Daredevil. And due to the fact that Nuke causes so many casualties, Matt kills the pilot of a helicopter that is supporting Nuke until the Avengers show up and take Nuke away. Just like the series, Matt is able to bring to light who Wilson Fisk and Kingpin really is, destroying his reputation, although unlike the series, Wilson Fisk does not go to prison at this point. Around then is when Heather Glenn dies in the comics. And at the end of this storyline, there is a bit of a rekindling of the relationship between Matt and Karen. Due to the incidents with Kingpin and his identity, however, Matt is forced to give up being a lawyer. Years later in 1991, there is a storyline named Last Rites that involves Matt destroying Kingpin's empire, and once he does so, Fisk ends up going to prison while Matt gets his law license back. It does kind of feel like Daredevil Season 3 took most of the Born Again story and kind of took the ending of the Last Rites story and put them together to really make what happens in Daredevil Season 3, because the ending of Daredevil Season 3 is far more like the Last Rites arc than the end of the Born Again arc. But the rest of the season is mostly like Born Again, with a little bit of some other stuff that we're going to talk about in a second. In 1993, there was a 5-issue miniseries named Daredevil the Man Without Fear, which heavily inspired Daredevil Seasons 1 and Seasons 2. In this comic, we get a lot more of an expanded origin for Matt that includes his pre-Daredevil career in his all-black costume, as well as slotting characters like Stick and Elektra into Matt's origin where they hadn't been before, even giving Wilson Fisk a role in the early years of the character. Interestingly enough, this series was initially thought of as having potential for a TV series, which is pretty cool. In the 1990s, Matt also falls in with another well-known character, Maya Lopez, aka Echo, which Hawkeye fans or Echo TV show fans will be very familiar with. During the Fall from Grace arc in 1993 and 1994, Matt is forced to deal with the supernatural and changes his suit to a darker black and red one, which was the early inspiration for the one we'll be seeing in Born Again Season 2. During this arc, Matt's identity is revealed to the world after 30 years of comic book stories of him almost having his name put out there. In the late 1990s, Daredevil once again receives some pretty drastic writing changes, being turned into a Marvel Knights title, which essentially meant the series wasn't fit for younger readers anymore. This comic was incredibly dark, and is where a lot of Matt's more religious aspects in the Netflix show come from. The comic deals with things like Matt having a conflict of conscience on whether to protect a child who could be the Antichrist, a storyline that also heavily inspired Season 3 of the Netflix show, where Karen Page is killed by Bullseye and Matt's too late to save her. This comic is a huge inspiration for Season 3, Episode 10. And around this time, Black Widow also comes into Matt's life because, man, that guy really does move from woman to woman, doesn't he? In early 2000, Matt makes an appearance in The Punisher, which, coupled with this story in his own title in the 1980s, these two stories really do build the backbone of what Season 2, Episode 3 of the show was. In this issue, Matt attacks Frank knocks Matt out and ties him up on a rooftop with a loaded gun taped to his arm. Matt is given a choice to kill Frank or let Frank kill his target. Only thing is, there is no firing pin on the gun, and Matt doesn't realize it. So Matt actually does try and shoot Frank, which kind of gains Frank's respect, and yeah, but nonetheless, Frank knocks Matt out and lets him go. Matt also becomes romantically involved with Mila Donovan at this point, eventually getting married to her. Throughout the mid-2000s, Matt deals with the issues that his identity being out in the world causes him, even ending up in prison for a stint. Eventually, Matt takes over as the leader of the Hand, and Matt leads them against Bullseye, finally being fed up with Bullseye's bullshit. So, to be honest, who wouldn't be? I mean, Bullseye was kind of a menace in the comics and in live action. What's that guy up to? But it turns out that Matt's time with the Hand and how dangerous he came was all the fault of a demonic possession that he had to be purged of. In more recent years, Matt did what Peter did in Spider-Man No Way Home and used supernatural forces to change the memories of everyone on Earth besides Foggy so that his identity was a secret again. He even joins the New Avengers for a bit after this, has a stint where he's back in San Francisco, then back in New York, and in the late 2010s, Daredevil in the comics was very similar to the kind of stories that the Born Again series is doing, where Matt is taking part in court cases to do with superheroes testifying in court and dealing with the fact that Wilson Fisk has now become the mayor of New York. When this happens, though, in something that doesn't happen in the show, Fisk makes an offer to Matt that Matt accepts, bringing Matt on as his deputy mayor and then full mayor while Fisk was injured. More recently in the 2020s, Matt accidentally kills a thief and ends up in prison because of it. Most recently in the comics though, Matt is out of prison and he is wearing the red and black suit from the Fall from Grace arc, until the most recent issues where he's back to his iconic red. He's currently in a relationship with Nala Skin, still teaming up with Elektra, who is also Daredevil now. We'll get to that later when we talk about Elektra. And to be honest, Matt's kind of cooler than ever. Because that's a lot of comic book lore on Matt Murdock, and not every character in this video is going to get that kind of in-depth discussion. There's actually a lot of characters in here who have so little issues or comic book history that it'll feel like I'm basically skipping over them when I get to them. Before moving on to the next character, we're going to do a really brief summary of Matt Murdock's other on-screen history. So Matt's first time showing up in anything was in a 1983 episode of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Matt Murdock. Boy, am I glad to see my friendly neighborhood lawyer.
And an animated series that was all about showcasing Spider-Man teaming up with other Marvel characters. Matt appears in Season 3, Episode 4 as both Daredevil and also Matt Murdock, playing Spider-Man's lawyer, and in this episode he was voiced by Frank Welker. His next on-screen appearance also happened to be his first live-action appearance, where he showed up in the Incredible Hulk spin-off movie, Trial of the Incredible Hulk.
See what I mean? No, I don't see it all.
In 1989. Interestingly here, he wears an all-black suit that looks like his pre-Daredevil suit, but this was an entire 4 years before that suit first showed up in the comics, which kind of means maybe it originated from this film. But Matt Murdock here is the attorney representing the Hulk against Wilson's Fisk, and in the show, in the movie, he's played by Rex Smith. Throughout the 1990s, Matt makes brief appearances in Marvel animation. He shows up for a total of 4 episodes of Spider-Man the Animated Series.
Pal, Matt Murdock.
I'm sure he'll be grateful, as I am, for everything.
Hey, we're even.
Spread throughout the 3rd and 4th seasons of the show, he was voiced here by Edward Lawrence Albert. Then he also made 2 appearances in the 2nd season of the Fantastic Four animated show, which was airing at the same time, but in a separate continuity.
It's not exactly high-tech, but hey, who's complaining? So, the elevator.
Here he is voiced by Bill Smitrovich. Daredevil wasn't seen again until 2003, when he showed up being played by Ben Affleck in the theatrical Daredevil film.
I'm not the bad guy.
His origin has slightly changed here, where instead of saving an old man and being hit by a truck, Matt follows his dad, learns about his dad's criminal dealings, and when trying to run away, he gets blinded by chemicals. Affleck actually reprised his role in the 2005 Elektra film, but his scenes were cut from the final release and are on YouTube or part of the physical releases. In 2015, we obviously saw the debut of Charlie Cox in the Netflix version. His first appearance outside of his own show happened in August of 2017 with the 8-episode Defenders miniseries, where he teams up with Luke Cage, Stick, Jessica Jones, and Danny Rand, as well as fighting Elektra on the Hand, which all set up Season 3 of his own show. Once the Netflix Daredevil was cancelled, there were a couple of years there where we had no idea if we'd ever see the character return in an MCU project. After this, there was a super brief cameo of an alternate version of Matt in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse in 2018, where there's a version of him merged with a version of Kingpin. 3 years later, Charlie Cox returns to the MCU playing Matt Murdock, Peter Parker's lawyer, in Spider-Man No Way Home.
How did you just do that?
I'm a really good lawyer.
And following this, Charlie Cox appeared in a Marvel project every single year bar 2023, appearing in She-Hulk Attorney at Law in 2022,
I'm Daredevil.
wearing a yellow costume and having a one-night stand with Jennifer Walters. In 2024, he made a cameo appearance in episode 1 of Echo.
I've been watching them all night. And then you guys show up. And screwed everything up.
Where he fights her, and in early 2025, Charlie Cox returns voicing the character this time in the animated series Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, where he played a variant of his MCU version.
Don't mind me. I was just leaving.
In March of this year, we saw the full return of the character in Daredevil Born Again, with Season 2 coming out next year, and a Season 3 was greenlit last week, so that's really fun. Also, just want to mention that in the final episode of X-Men 97 Season 1, Daredevil makes a non-speaking cameo, reprising his role from the 90s Spider-Man animated series, and in late 2024, the character appeared in the 44-minute LEGO special, LEGO Marvel Avengers Mission Demolition, and Matt Murdock was mentioned in these projects.
How many fingers am I holding up?
1.
Next up is Franklin Foggy Nelson, who also made his first appearance in the first episode of Daredevil, and just like Matt himself, his first comic appearance is in Daredevil issue 1, except unlike Matt, Foggy only appears in 38 out of the 39 episodes of the show, and while he spends most of the show as one of the main driving forces for the firm's case, he also has some serious falling outs with Matt once he learns who Matt is, leading to, in the Season 2 finale, him eventually leaving and becoming part of Hogarth, Shaw, and Benowitz with Jerry Hogarth from Jessica Jones, before in Season 3 becoming one of the targets for Fisk's return, and the show ends with him, Matt, and Karen reforming Nelson Murdock, but this time as Nelson Murdock and Page. I covered some of this when we were talking about Matt, but Foggy met Matt in college, was studying to be a lawyer, and both characters founded Nelson and Murdock together. When Karen is hired as the firm's secretary, both Matt and Foggy fall in love with her, which was very much played in the show as well. Foggy's home life in the comics is slightly different to the show, however. In the comics, his birth mother leaves when he's young, and he's raised by his stepmother mostly, a woman that has the same name as Foggy's birth mother in the show. In Daredevil issue 2, Foggy was the person who helped the Fantastic Four get their lease on the Baxter building. While Matt was fighting criminals as Daredevil, these same issues had Foggy be the primary civilian lawyer for characters like the Owl, Kilgrave, Stiltman, even helping Namor the Submariner try and make a case to stop the surface world from doing damage to the sea. Now, there was a weird subplot where Foggy tried to pretend to be Daredevil so that Karen would fall in love with him. He even got a fake Daredevil suit made by Melvin Potter and tried to fight villains, but she didn't go for it or believe him. Around this time, the whole Matt pretending he had a twin brother Mike thing was going on, and that made things even weirder. In Daredevil issue 10, Foggy was taken by Abner Jones to be a district attorney, and during this time he met Debbie Harris, who was a girl he was in love with from school. Realizing that Karen was way more smitten with Matt than himself, Foggy started seeing Debbie, and she became one of his long-term love interests in the comics, even going as far as marrying her at a point. Foggy eventually became district attorney with Matt as his assistant DA and Karen as his secretary, ending Nelson and Murdock for the time being until Matt left for San Francisco and Karen left for Los Angeles. Once Matt returned to New York, he returned in time to see Foggy lose re-election to Blake Tower, and with this over with, Foggy and Matt restarted Nelson and Murdock, first as Storefront Legal Services and then later as Nelson and Murdock once again. Way later on down the line in issue 180, Elektra was hired by Kingpin to kill Foggy, but she just can't do it. And then all this culminates in the moment that Bullseye kills Elektra, and then Matt tries to kill Bullseye. Eventually, Foggy and Debbie's marriage collapses and they get divorced, which leads to Foggy getting into a relationship with Liz Allen in the 90s. Liz being an important, well-known Spider-Man character and was the love interest of Peter in Spider-Man Homecoming, so let's pray that they never do that storyline in the MCU. After a run-in with the Spider-Man villain Mysterio, Foggy and Liz have some relationship problems, and their relationship collapses too. Now, here's something that born-again fans might find a little interesting. So in the mid-2000s, once Matt's identity as Daredevil became public and Matt ends up going to prison, Foggy goes to visit him and due to his association with Daredevil, is stabbed badly by inmates to the point that Matt hears Foggy's heartbeat get slower and slower until it ceases, and Foggy is declared dead. Isn't that really similar to the opening of Born Again, where Matt is hearing Foggy's heartbeat until it ceases? The difference in the comics, however, is that Foggy never died. He actually was taken and placed in FBI witness protection without Matt's knowledge. All I'm saying is, I wouldn't count Foggy Nelson out of the MCU just yet. Eventually, after all of this, Foggy was able to come out of witness protection. Matt was released from prison, and Nelson and Murdock was once again started. But Foggy eventually became really angry with the direction of who Matt was becoming as a person, and this is really similar to in the show when Foggy left Nelson and Murdock. But in the comics, Foggy fires Matt from Nelson and Murdock, which is the straw that forced Matt to become the leader of the Hand during the Shadowland arc. In the 2010s, Foggy unfortunately was diagnosed with a version of cancer in his hip, and in order to protect his life now that Matt's identity was out there, Foggy once again faked his own death with the help of Hank Pym. Then Matt used Kilgrave's children to erase the world's memory of his identity, which we mentioned earlier, and that allowed Foggy to live in the open once again, having beaten cancer. Eventually, Matt became mayor of New York for a brief period when Fisk was too injured to be mayor, and during this, Foggy became Matt's chief of staff of New York. There was a whole really weird storyline in 2023 in a recent Daredevil run where Foggy had actually been killed but then was resurrected by the Hand so that he'd be a spy. But once the person who resurrected Foggy was killed, that meant that Foggy died, so then Foggy's soul was trapped in like this hellish place until Daredevil rescued his soul. And I've seen a lot of people bring up that as a way for Foggy to come back in the MCU rather than the MCU witness protection version. And I don't know about that. I think if the show is going to bring Foggy back, they're going to go with the witness protection version. But Foggy's life in the comics is quite convoluted and almost always tied to Matt as Daredevil. But it's pretty obvious that he's an integral part of the Daredevil mythos. And throughout his 60 years of existence in the comics, he's pretty much always been tied to Matt as a character and as his closest friend, which makes me feel like he kind of has to come back in Born Again Season 2, but we'll see what happens. Outside the comics, Foggy hasn't been mentioned or seen in anything until 2003's Daredevil film, where he was played by Jon Favreau.
You think too much? Yeah, it was a little much, you know? You always want to do the cheer thing, and that's embarrassing. We want sympathy, it's not the Gone Show.
Which makes a deleted scene from No Way Home really fun to rewatch.
Rogan, is there something wrong?
Abby, stop sweating. How do you do that?
In the 2003 film, Foggy is very much still Matt's closest friend and confidant, being a part of his life heavily, forming Nelson and Murdock with him, and being more focused on the lawyer and making money for the firm life than Matt's vigilanteing. Following this, he's only ever been seen or mentioned in MCU-related projects. Daredevil in 2015, obviously, then The Defenders in 2017, where he starts as representing Luke Cage and helping get Luke out of prison, until he's forced to reunite with Matt when things get bad for all the characters in the show, ultimately ending up briefly in police protection along with most of the other friends of the main characters. Foggy returns the following year in 2018 in an episode of Jessica Jones Season 2, where he's working with Jerry Hogarth. Then an episode of Luke Cage Season 2, where he's once again helping out Luke, all until Season 3 of Daredevil, when he becomes a central character once again. Following this, in early 2019, he was mentioned in Season 2, Episode 11 of The Punisher, when Karen returns to help Frank and mentions him. He was basically in the Marvel Shadow Realm, which most MCU TV characters seem to end up in at one point or another, until he finally returned in Episode 1 of Born Again, and was unfortunately killed, or was he, by Bullseye in the opening moments of the show. He is going to be returning in Season 2, but a lot of people involved in the show have came out and said that it's in a flashback capacity, but I wouldn't be surprised if he returns in a little bit more than flashbacks. And that is Foggy Nelson. So let's keep going. Are you bored yet?
But I watched you fight for me. Twice, actually. You know, I dreamed about that.
Karen Page is the third and final Nelson and Murdock and Page crew to round out the start of this video. Played by Deborah Ann Woll, she first appeared in episode 1 of season 1, and she went on to appear in all 39 episodes of the show, just like Matt. First appearing in the show framed for the murder of a man named Daniel Fisher, she's taken on as Matt and Foggy's first case, and once she gets out of jail, she begins working for them as their secretary. Eventually, she becomes intertwined with Ben Urich and his story looking into Wilson Fisk. In Season 2, she takes some work at the New York Bulletin under Mitchell Ellison and starts working from Ben Urich's office. During this time, she becomes very interested in Frank Castle and his war on the Punisher, all the while having an on-again, off-again relationship with Matt. She becomes a target for both Kingpin and Bullseye in Season 3, and once both are defeated, she becomes the third and newest part of Nelson, Murdock, and Page. So we already did cover a solid amount about her character when talking about Matt and Foggy, but in the comics her first appearance was also in Daredevil issue 1 from February 1964, where she makes her debut as the secretary for Nelson and Murdock. Her backstory in the comics is very different to the show, however, because in the comics her family is very wealthy and she had a very social, normal, well put together school life. In the show her family is less wealthy, she loses her mother, she becomes a bit of a party girl and sells drugs and ultimately crashes a car with her younger brother inside, which kills him. A much more tragic backstory than in the comics, but one that is sort of alluded to later on in the comics. In the early comics, she was very much a damsel in distress style character, which unfortunately most of the supporting women characters were in Marvel Comics and in DC Comics in their early years. She was constantly kidnapped by whoever the villain of the month was, and she was madly in love with Matt Murdock, and she started seeing him and working with Foggy while Foggy was the DA. Karen's father became the supervillain known as Death's Head in issue 56 of Daredevil from July 1969, and we'll cover that later on. But nonetheless, he sacrifices himself to save Karen's life, and it's right after his funeral that Matt reveals to Karen that he is in fact Daredevil. Now Matt tells Karen that he'll stop being Daredevil if she marries him, but this doesn't last long, however, as in issue 58, Matt is forced to become the hero once again, which Karen is not happy about. In issue 65 from April 1970, Karen starts to become a pretty self-sufficient character, and it isn't just tied to whatever Matt's story of the week is, and she becomes an actress in Hollywood. At this point, Matt and Karen are no longer together after Matt broke his promise to give up being Daredevil, but Karen still feels a certain way for him. So dealing with this, she begins being close with her agent, Phil Hitchcock, until Phil proposed to her and she didn't like this, so she went to Matt and said she'd marry Matt, and then when she saw Matt with Black Widow, she was like, you know what, I don't want to marry Matt anymore either. Following this, Karen's appearances in comics became far more sporadic. She showed up in Ghost Rider issue 13 in May of 1975 when Johnny Blaze runs into her in LA. She hangs around in Ghost Rider's comics for a handful of issues, but after this, Karen doesn't play many roles in the comics for a while until she makes her return in Daredevil Born Again, beginning in Daredevil issue 226, which was in October of 1985. And during these comics, it's revealed that in her 10 years away from New York and the main characters of Daredevil, she's had some pretty dark and hard times. She gets addicted to heroin and begins making adult films, if you catch my meaning, and stuck for money and needing her next heroin hit, she sells Matt Murdock's identity as Daredevil, and that information eventually reaches Wilson Fisk, who is more than happy to do something about said information. Fisk ends up sending hired killers after Karen as he doesn't want anyone except him to know who Matt is, and she eventually is able to get her way back to New York City to Matt along with her dangerous drug dealer Paulo Scorsese, until Matt was able to stop Paulo. After this, Matt forgave Karen, she got clean from her drug addiction, and they started their life together once again in Hell's Kitchen. Karen ended up working for a stint at a clinic to help drug addicts and suicide cases. Karen and Matt tried and fell in and out of relationships over the next decade. Matt also went through a stint of personality disorders, and Karen had to help him through this. Eventually, she became a radio host at one of Wilson Fisk's radio stations, and after this, in March of 1998, in Daredevil issue 375, a supervillain named Mr. Fear made it appear as if Karen murdered a police officer, and she's even put on trial for it, with Matt appearing as her lawyer. So this is actually kind of similar to the beginning of the Daredevil Netflix show, where she's arrested for a murder that she didn't actually commit, with Matt and Foggy representing her. And this ended in both cases with her being found not guilty. The following year, when Matt was protecting a baby claimed to be the Antichrist, Mysterio used Bullseye to find the baby and went to the church where Matt and his mother were protecting it. And in Daredevil issue 7 from January 1999, Bullseye killed Karen in a death scene identical to Daredevil season 3 episode 9. Karen is also one of the few comic book characters that has remained dead, and now 26 years later, she is still dead in the comics. The baby that Matt protected and Karen died to protect was given up for adoption, and Matt ended up naming the baby Karen. So in all, Karen Page has had a mostly very dark comic book history. Outside of the comics, she was first mentioned in an episode of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, mentioned as an actress in the movie Dinosaur Destroyer, which she apparently was starring in alongside Simon Williams, who Marvel fans will recognize the name as Wonder Man, who's actually getting a Disney Plus series later on this year. I think in December this year it's supposed to come out, a miniseries, which is going to be really fun to see that. But what's worth noting is that this episode was from September 1981, in season 1 episode 2. 2 whole years before Daredevil showed up in the same series, which means Karen had her first mention outside of the comics way before Matt did, and 10 times longer before Foggy did. Karen made her first actual appearance in the 2003 Daredevil film, played by Ellen Pompeo.
Maybe you're looking at it wrong. August 9th.
Where she was a pretty limited role as the secretary of Matt and Foggy's firm. Elektra was the main love interest for Matt in this film, so they didn't do anything there with Karen. Beyond this, her only mentions or appearances come from Marvel Cinematic Universe TV shows. Beyond Daredevil, she was mentioned in Iron Fist Season 1 a couple of times, she appeared in Defenders 2017 along with the rest of the casts, and she played a fairly important roles in both seasons of Punisher, where she teamed up and helped Frank a couple times. She even got a mention in Luke Cage Season 2 in 2018, and one of the more cool things is that she got a mention in Season 2 Episode 9 of Cloak and Dagger, where she's mentioned as having wrote a story about Luke Cage.
Luke Cage in Harlem Rumble by Karen Page.
She then entered that TV character limbo where everybody kind of ends up in. If you're a part of Marvel Television at some point or another, you're going to end up in that place where nobody knows when you're coming back or if you're coming back. And Karen thankfully did come back in Daredevil Born Again, where she played a limited role in Season 1, but she will have a much more substantial role in Season 2 coming next year.
Because she knew we got the devil inside.
So it's my fault. Would you be honest with yourself?
Battling Jack Murdock is the father of Matt and first appeared in Season 1, Episode 1, played by John Patrick Hayden, and he's a boxer who is well past his prime and is forced to begin taking dive fights to make money for his son. Unfortunately, when he refuses to take a dive in a fight, he's killed by the people who demanded him to. He appears in the first 2 episodes of the show in strictly flashback purposes to give us Matt's origin, and he then returns in Episode 9 of Season 3 when we get the history of his mother and how she met Jack. This also gives us some important moments where Matt hallucinates seeing his father in potentially my favorite scene in the entire show.
It lets you hurt people. It makes you feel like it's for something important, something good, maybe even for God. But that ain't the truth.
Just like the other characters we've already talked about, Jack first appeared in Daredevil issue 1 in February of 1964. The comic also depicted his death, and unlike the show, Jack is actually married to Maggie in the comics, and it isn't just a brief fling until she leaves him and returns to the church. Still a boxer in the comics, in his prime he was called the Red Devil, and was a masked fighter in the ring. You can see where Matt gets it from. But he also went by battling Jack Murdock when not wearing the mask. One of the later changes of Jack's character was becoming a bit more nasty towards Matt. At one point, Matt got in a fight with some neighbors, and Jack beat Matt after this because of it. He was sorry about it, but I mean, come on, man, you can't do that. One thing that was different about the original comics is that in the show, Jack Murdock dies when Matt is still extremely young. But in the comics, Jack doesn't die until Matt had already graduated college and was a law student. When Jack can no longer support Matt due to the fights drying up, he goes in with Roscoe Sweeney, who is also known as the Fixer, and Roscoe wants Jack to take a dive, and while Jack initially agrees, during the fight he can't do it and fights and wins, which leads Roscoe to send a hitman to kill Jack, which leads to Matt becoming Daredevil to avenge his father. In the mid-2000s, there was a bit of a reinvention. Jack got his own 4-issue miniseries called Daredevil, Battling Jack Murdock, which goes into the final days of his life, and also through flashbacks talking about how Matt was first brought into his life, showing Jack's fling with Josie. It shows the kind of bad things Jack did in order to get money, and how horrible he could be to Matt before Matt's accident. And in this comic, they also semi-reinvent Matt's origin and show him training and fighting in a mask before Jack's death. But Jack Murdock is one of those comic book characters that his death is kind of integral to the character, and thus he stays dead in every main version. His first outside of the comics mention came in the shape of a photo in 1989's Trial of the Incredible Hulk, which was also Matt Murdock's first live-action appearance. Following that, he had a brief appearance in Spider-Man the Animated Series in the 90s. He appeared in both Season 3 episodes 6 and 7 in flashbacks accompanying Daredevil's part of the episode. In Spider-Man the Animated Series, Kingpin was actually responsible for the accident that blinded Matt, and thus Jack vows to get revenge, but is caught and killed by the Kingpin. He's also a boxer in these episodes. Believe it or not, he is technically in the 2002 Spider-Man film, played by Scott L. Schwartz.
Oh God, I can't feel my leg!
And while he's simply called Screaming Wrestler in the credits of the movie, the novel of the film specifies that this is Battling Jack Murdock. He appears a year later in 2003's Daredevil, played by David Keith.
Pulling double overtime down at the docks when I was working for Fallon. What are you, nuts?
Known as the Devil Murdock, and this version is very similar to the Battling Jack Murdock comic, and has Jack be a washed-up boxer who does mob jobs for money when told to take a dive job in a boxing match. Jack saw Matt in the crowd and he couldn't do it, and Jack was killed for it. After this, we saw him in 2015's Daredevil, and he received mentions in both The Defenders in 2017 and Born Again earlier on this year.
It means that I'm not the Samaritan. That I'm not the priest. Or the Levite. That I am the ill intent.
Decided not to shave so you can see in real time how I'm aging while this video is being made. That's how long it's taking. But next up, we have the major villain of Charlie Cox's Daredevil, who is Wilson Fisk, aka Kingpin, played by Vincent D'Onofrio. And while he doesn't make a full appearance until episode 3 of season 1, his voice is in fact heard in episode 1. He made appearances in 27 out of the 39 episodes of Daredevil. He was a main villain who rose through the ranks of New York's crime syndicates to be the Kingpin in season 1. He then falls from the top due to the work of Matt, Foggy, Karen, and Ben Urich at the end of season 1, and he is put in prison where he remains for all of season 2. He shows up in season 2 for a couple episodes, even helping Frank Castle get out of prison that season, and in season 3 he gets out and begins targeting the lives of the main characters before ending up back in prison at the end of the season. So Fisk is the first character we're talking about that didn't actually make their first appearance in Daredevil issue 1. He didn't make his first appearance in a Daredevil comic at all, appearing in Amazing Spider-Man issue 50 from April 1967, and remained primarily just a Spider-Man villain for almost 15 years before he started being a regular fixture of Matt Murdock's life. He first showed up during the Spider-Man No More arc that has Peter give up being Spider-Man due to Aunt May's health, and in this comic Fisk considers himself the Lord of the Underworld and simply refers to himself as the Kingpin. Him being called Wilson Fisk doesn't actually become a part of the comics until much later, and he has decided to rise up in New York since word is spreading that Spider-Man isn't protecting the city anymore, and he wants all of the criminal elements in the city to be under him. Frederick Foswell, aka the Big Man and one of Spider-Man's more prolific villains, isn't a fan of the fact that out of nowhere this guy called the Kingpin is taking over, and so he goes to the Kingpin and demands that Fisk works for him. And how do you think this went? Well, Fisk takes him prisoner and beats him down a little bit. And at this point, J. Jonah Jameson, for some stupid reason, has found Spider-Man's costume and has kept it, so Peter, hearing how bad the city has gone in his absence, takes back the costume, ready to use it. The following issue in May of 1967 is the first issue to feature Kingpin on the cover. At this point, Kingpin has taken over all of the various mobs and gangs of the city. Kingpin sees issues of the Daily Bugle not being too kindly to Fisk and his takeover, and thus puts the editor in his crosshairs. Unfortunately, and not known to Kingpin though, Spider-Man is back and stops some of his men, and it's during this fight that Peter first hears the name the Kingpin. At this time, Kingpin also hears Spider-Man's back, setting both characters up for their first head-to-head. And Kingpin isn't happy with how his people are reacting to Spider-Man, so it's during this that he first shows off the kind of person he is by personally beating down the people under him. Really the first hint that Fisk will get his hands dirty in a way that we see quite often in the Netflix show and in Hawkeye and in Echo. Over the arc, Fisk captures J. Jonah Jameson, and once Spider-Man tries to save Jonah, seeing Kingpin for the first time, Kingpin captures him as well. Kingpin captures him for a lot of reasons. Well, one, because Peter is a quippy kind of guy who, unfortunately, in his early appearances, has quite a habit of underestimating his opponents. And Kingpin is one of the more darker and serious characters of the early Spider-Man comics. Kingpin also has a lot of weird 60s gimmicks, like gas shooting from his jacket, a ray cane, things that help him incapacitate Spider-Man easily. And in issue 52, which is the third and final issue of Kingpin's first comic book arc, in 60s fashion, Kingpin tries to kill Spider-Man and J. Jonah Jameson by having a room fill up with water while they're both tied up, instead of, just killing them, which would have taken 2 seconds, would have been over with. No, he's got to set up an elaborate James Bond-esque kill trap or whatever, and obviously this didn't actually kill Spider-Man, and he escaped within like 2 pages, and then he fights Kingpin, and again, in typical 60s fashion, or Flash Season 5 fashion, if you get that reference, Kingpin simply escapes by distracting Peter for a couple of seconds. After this, Kingpin didn't stay gone from the comics for long, returning only half a year later and 7 issues later in Amazing Spider-Man issue 59 from January 1968. And in this issue, Kingpin appears right at the end to reveal he's a supervillain called a Brainwasher who has been brainwashing some of the elite of New York cities. The 1960s, am I right? Things are crazy. Following this in issue 60, Kingpin and Spider-Man have their rematch, and in this issue they fight right in front of Captain Stacy, Gwen Stacy's father, who Kingpin has in a trance. Spider-Man is forced to flee at this time, and Kingpin continues brainwashing people. When Peter starts investigating what's going on himself and not as Spider-Man, Kingpin actually goes after Peter Parker, not knowing that he's Spider-Man and just thinking of him as a random teenager. This kind of shows you the kind of character that Kingpin is, that he's going to target children pretty much. At the end of this arc, in an attempt to lure Spider-Man, Kingpin takes both Gwen Stacy and her father prisoner, and as expected, Spider-Man shows up to rescue them, and while Spider-Man does rescue them and destroys Kingpin's brainwashing machine, Kingpin once again escapes. Are you noticing a pattern? Kingpin continues to show up in Amazing Spider-Man issues over the next couple of years, usually for a brief 3-issue arc before he disappears again. First in late 1968, where he invades a college protest to get an ancient tablet. What is interesting about this arc, though, is that in the middle of it, in issue 69, one of Kingpin's henchmen mentions Kingpin's missus, and Kingpin beats this guy and tells him that nobody ever mentions her. Towards the end of this arc, Kingpin allows himself to be arrested so that he can tell the police Spider-Man is actually a criminal just like him, thus turning them against Spider-Man in the following issue, and Kingpin escapes jail. It's at the end of this issue where Kingpin is rescued by his wife, who still remains unnamed and unseen, so they're really building up a mystery with that character. In Kingpin's next appearance in issue 83 in early 1970, Vanessa finally makes her first full appearance, and we get some insight finally into Kingpin's life and character, learning about his son who was recently declared missing and presumed dead, when in reality he's currently a villain called the Schemer who is fighting Spider-Man. In this arc, the Schemer, who Kingpin doesn't know is his son, begins going after him, and in the following issue 85, Kingpin finds out who the Schemer is, and that it is his son Richard, and that Richard wants his father to stop being the Kingpin. I can't wait till they change his name to Wilson Fisk so that I can stop just calling him the Kingpin, because it's really getting annoying, you know? Believe it or not, Kingpin's next actual comic book appearance happens in Captain America in mid-1972, 5 years after he first made it into the comics and 2 years since his last appearance. And in Captain America issue 147 from early 1972, Captain America, Falcon, and the S.H.I.E.L.D. Femforce, yep, that was the thing, are battling Hydra in a fortress near Las Vegas, when it's revealed that Kingpin, Vanessa, and his son Richard have been the current people in control of Hydra. And not only this, but Richard was the Hydra soldier known as Supreme Hydra, responsible for the almost killing of Sharon Carter. Then when Captain America comes looking for answers, Fisk reveals that he's now the Kingpin and the man in charge of Hydra. Kinda crazy, right? This leads to Cap and Kingpin fighting because of course it does, and there's a sequence that is basically word for word how Spidey's first fight with Kingpin went, where it's Captain America saying over and over again, "Oh my god, Kingpin, you're so quick. How are you so fast? You're not as dumb as you look." The 1970s. After Cap and Falcon fight Kingpin, Red Skull shows up and is like, "No way, Kingpin, you're not the head of Hydra. I'm the head of Hydra." And then Cap's like, "Okay, Kingpin, hold up, maybe we team up now." Now, there is a great moment immediately afterwards where Red Skull reveals that he's a Nazi and that Hydra are Nazis, and Kingpin straight away goes, "That fucking idiot son of mine teaming up with Nazis. What was he thinking?" Because Kingpin apparently had no idea that Hydra was from Nazis. Even Kingpin knows at this point that you shouldn't be in cahoots with the Nazis, at any point. Even Kingpin knows this. And this leads to a moment where Kingpin genuinely teams up with Captain America and Falcon, recognizing that Red Skull is clearly the actual bad guy here. And another awesome moment, while Falcon calls in S.H.I.E.L.D. reinforcements, Kingpin gets in touch with the criminal elements in Las Vegas and tells them to get here now because we all have a common enemy. This all ends with Captain America defeating Red Skull. Because Kingpin was actually on the right side in the end, he was free to go. Now, this was a really strange era for the character, because he doesn't properly return again until early 1976, when in issue 154 of Amazing Spider-Man, the character hires the Sandman to cause problems, but he remains behind the scenes. He then does so in issue 159 again, when he's now hired the Tinkerer, and this all culminates in late 1976, when it's revealed that a lot of the recent things and villains in Spider-Man's life have actually been the result of the Kingpin. Over this arc, it's revealed that Richard, Kingpin's son, is dying, so Kingpin tries to steal Peter's life and body so that Richard can live. Crazy times. This all ends with Kingpin and Spider-Man fighting, and it appearing like Kingpin has died to both his son and his wife. The Kingpin actually stays dead in the comics for 3 years until the middle of 1979, when he makes a return in Amazing Spider-Man issue 196. In the following issue, Kingpin reveals how he survived, having swam into a drainage pipe. Now, funnily enough, this is actually exactly how Matt survived after the Defenders and in the beginning of season 3 of the Netflix show. It turns out that Vanessa isn't too happy about Kingpin's crime life, so he gives him an ultimatum that he has 24 hours to leave this life behind, and he's decided to spend that final hours destroying Spider-Man for the last time. And this ends with Kingpin giving up the fight and deciding to be with Vanessa over killing Spider-Man. So Kingpin keeps showing up and then disappearing for years and years at a time at this point, because he stays gone from Marvel Comics again for another 2 years until mid-1981. And when he returns, it's to face Daredevil in Daredevil issue 170. In this issue, it's revealed that Kingpin has been in Japan training. This issue also reveals his name finally as Wilson Fisk, which is good to know that despite the character being so associated with Spider-Man over Daredevil sometimes, a lot of the main staples of the character actually originate from Daredevil comics. In the story, Vanessa wants him to come back to New York to get some lawyers, and guess who they pick? Nelson and Mother effing Murdock. Unfortunately, while at Nelson and Murdock, Vanessa is kidnapped in order to draw the Kingpin to New York so that Bullseye can kill him, and Bullseye is working for the mob. In the following issue 171, we see the first fight between Fisk and Daredevil. In similar fashion to himself years ago in Amazing Spider-Man, it appears as if the mob have killed Vanessa, and this drives Fisk crazy and right back to being the Kingpin again. The following issues of Daredevil concern Kingpin waging a war in New York City to get vengeance for the death of Vanessa and climb his way to the top of the city once again. It's also at this point that Bullseye decides to work for Fisk. When Fisk finds the guy who he believes was responsible for Vanessa's death, he does to him something that is very similar to what Fisk does to the Russians in Season 1, Episode 4 of the Netflix show. Fisk, once again being the Kingpin of New York, leaves him open to other heroes. In Marvel Team-Up Annual 4, where he uses Kilgrave to deal with Spider-Man, Daredevil, Iron Fist, Moon Knight, and Power Man, aka Luke Cage. And it's also revealed in this issue that Fisk is immune to Kilgrave's powers. In Daredevil issue 177, Elektra becomes known to Fisk, and in the following issues, Fisk contacts and meets her. This leads to Elektra becoming Fisk's current top assassin. And meanwhile this has happened, Daredevil has found out where Vanessa is and lets Fisk know that he has Vanessa, that he knows her location, and that he's only going to give it to him if Fisk plays ball, which kind of creates this like mini era where, like very similar to the season 2 of the Netflix show, where Matt really has the upper hand on Fisk, where he can, you know, with a snap of his fingers have Vanessa sent to prison or something like that, and Fisk is kind of desperate to make sure that that doesn't happen. Then following this, we have the comic that we've talked a lot about today, which is issue 181, where Fisk sends Elektra to kill Foggy because Nelson and Murdock are running a case that is trying to expose some corruption that Fisk is behind. And when she can't do it, Bullseye kills her. Bullseye also returns to Fisk after killing Elektra and tells Fisk that Matt is Daredevil, but Fisk doesn't believe him, which is going to bite him in the ass when in a couple issues from now in Born Again, he will have to deal with the fact that Matt Murdock is in fact Daredevil. By issue 186, Wilson has Vanessa back and is trying to cure her of what happened in her near death. And over the next few years, Fisk continues fighting Daredevil, Spider-Man. He has run-ins with a lot of New York-based heroes like Spider-Woman, Black Widow, Moon Knight, Black Cat, the Punisher, Cloak and Dagger, and during his Punisher run-in, Frank Castle takes Vanessa hostage, who still isn't back to her full self, and around this time Fisk is also helping Bullseye recover from almost dying to Daredevil. But once Bullseye is fully recovered, Fisk points him right back at Daredevil. In Born Again in 1985 and 1986, Fisk finally does learn that Matt Murdock is in fact Daredevil. During this arc, Fisk goes after Matt's life, destroying everything, freezing his money, paying a murderer to dress up as Daredevil and go around terrorizing New York, along with Karen and Foggy. He eventually pays the supervillain Nuke to create havoc in New York to call Daredevil to save the people. And he thinks it's impossible for this to be traced back to him, but he's wrong, and the series ends with Wilson Fisk, who has been trying to be seeming as legitimate since returning to New York, to be exposed publicly, but he avoids prison for now. In the 1990s, with the Man Without Fear miniseries, Fisk and his business dealings get retroactively placed right at the beginning of Matt's career as Daredevil, which is very much what the Netflix show does as well. It's kind of with this comic and its effects that Fisk and Kingpin is seen as a bit more of a Daredevil character than a Spider-Man character. And it's also right around this time in the main comics where he buys his own television and radio programs, and that's where Karen begins working at. Later on during the 1990s arc, Last Rites, after years of trying to properly take Fisk down, Daredevil finally accomplishes this by getting him indicted on federal charges. And at the end of this arc, there's a scene that is almost exactly like Daredevil's Season 1 finale, where Fisk attempts to escape, but Daredevil stops him and fights him in an alley. And eventually Fisk does get out of prison, but it takes a while and he has to claw his way back to the top as Kingpin once again. In the very late 90s, Maya Lopez aka Echo is introduced into the comics, and Fisk's relation to her is revealed. In Daredevil issue 27 from November of 2001, there's a bit of an uprising inside Fisk's empire, and this leads to Fisk's son dying, who is Richard. Fisk was in and out of prison for a lot of the 2000s, and he was actually in prison while Matt was there, following his identity as Daredevil becoming public knowledge, and he was the person behind Foggy's stabbing in the prison. Both Matt and Fisk being in the same prison was a scheme by the FBI, hoping that Kingpin and Daredevil would take each other out. But this didn't go according to plan, however, and both Matt and Fisk had to survive a prison riot by working together. Matt was eventually the reason Fisk was released from prison by taking on his case, and then in 2017, Kingpin got his own miniseries where an author with the name of Sarah Dewey was brought in to write a book on Fisk. Right after this, in Daredevil in late 2017, Fisk became mayor, and after a string of Fisk trying very hard to rehabilitate his public image and helping the people of New York, he ends up now as kind of the person that everybody wants to save New York, and he even ends up bringing Matt on beside him into the New York government. During this arc, Fisk really got his goal of completely controlling New York City and its government. He started a war on vigilantes and superheroes, which we saw some of in Born Again, and we will see a lot more of that in Season 2 of Born Again. And in issue 600, Daredevil leads a ton of heroes in a New York uprising against Fisk and his government. This leads the Hand to attack and injure Fisk, which takes him out of action while Matt takes over the New York government for a while. Fisk doesn't stay off the board for long though, and in issue 605 from mid-2018, Fisk returns as the mayor of the government. Following this in 2019, while Fisk is still mayor, Daredevil accidentally kills a thief, and Fisk obviously becomes obsessed with this, putting his task force on arresting Daredevil at all costs. And then in 2020, Fisk begins sort of losing himself a little bit, becoming rattled, scared, killing people for no reason. And most recently in the comic, Fisk was possessed by a demon known as Greed, but Daredevil helped exorcise him. Outside of the comics, Fisk has had a long history. He had a ton of animated appearances in Spider-Man related animated shows, first in the 1967 Spider-Man animated show, first appearing in Season 2 Episode 2 from September 1968.
You got your ideology mixed up, writing man. Here I am king.
And then Season 3 Episode 3 from April 1970. He was voiced by Tom Harvey in these appearances. And the first episode with him was very similar to his first appearance in the comics, mainly from the Kingpin side of that episode, not really from the Spider-Man side of the episode. But the Kingpin side of the episode had a lot of similarities with his first appearance in the comics. Then the second episode was very much a loose adaptation of the Brainwasher arc from the comics, which we discussed earlier as well. He next had an appearance in the 1970s Spider-Woman animated show in Season 1 Episode 5, which aired in October of 1979.
Biggest crime wave of the century. But first, I have a little surprise for you.
Now, I actually couldn't find out who voiced him in this episode. I even went and I watched the episode, and the credits at the end of the episode, they list everybody who was in the episode, but they don't list who they correlate to, like who they voiced in the episode, just who they were. And I even went to the IMDb, which only lists 3 people as who they actually voiced. Like, the whole cast is listed, but who people voiced is only 3 of the characters, none of them being Fisk. And then there's this voice actor registry website that I use as a huge source for when making this video, that will have lists of characters in every animated show or video game that they appeared in, and exactly who voiced them in those. And even that just says unknown voice actor for Wilson Fisk in this episode. So that was kind of crazy that I guess they just didn't keep a lot of records back then for this sort of stuff. Like, none of the Marvel databases didn't have this information and stuff like that. So sorry if you came to this video to know who voiced Kingpin in the Spider-Woman episode from 1979. I can't help you. I wish I could. Anyway, next up, his appearance was in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends in 1981.
You made a mistake, Faustus. Your last mistake.
Let's take him. Spider friends, go for it!
In one episode voiced by Walker Edmiston, as well as 2 appearances in season 1 of the normal Spider-Man animated series in 1982, voiced by Stan Jones.
You don't understand, do you? Intellectually, Spider-Man is no match for me. I can toy with him.
And it's weird because a lot of the Marvel databases consider these 2 Spider-Man shows as part of the same continuity and a part of like the same wider, I guess, show in a lot of ways, but they had different designs, they had different voice actors, so I'm not too sure about that. Following this, he had his first live-action appearance alongside Daredevil in Trial of the Incredible Hulk in 1989, played by John Rhys-Davies, who is a well-known actor.
I humbly submit myself for the post of manager of all our tentacles.
And he was actually the main villain of this film, which makes sense with it being Daredevil's first live-action appearance, but outside of the comics, this was the first time that Kingpin and Daredevil had actually been tied to each other, since before this he only ever appeared as a foil in Spider-Man related projects. After this, like basically every Marvel existing character at the time, Kingpin showed up in the Marvel's animated lineup with Spider-Man the Animated Series, and he is one of the more regular villains of the show.
Crime, my livelihood, my life, all of it jeopardized by the sudden appearance of Spider-Man.
Showing up for a total of 35 episodes throughout all 5 seasons, voiced by Roscoe Lee Brown. And in the series, he was responsible for the murder of Jack Murdock, and he was also responsible for creating this show's version of the Sinister Six. He shows up again in live action in 2003's Daredevil film, played by Michael Clark Duncan.
It's a shame you came here wounded. I would have loved to fight you in your prime.
And is one of the primary villains of that film. And following on from this, in one of the more interesting things I found out about when making this video, is that Michael Clark Duncan actually returns later that year as Kingpin in the 2nd episode of Spider-Man, the new animated series.
Poor little Spider-Man can't get no respect.
Playing a version of Kingpin that is very much based on the Daredevil film. What makes this more interesting is that originally Spider-Man the new animated series was meant to be tied to the Tobey Maguire Sam Raimi universe. Like, it was supposed to be sort of a sequel to the first film in a lot of ways, and obviously that didn't play out. Like, they changed that later on. But I guess that this technically means that originally Daredevil was probably planned to be part of that Spider-Man universe, but then that changed later on. Believe it or not, Fisk actually stays gone from television or film until he shows up in 2015's Daredevil. He's the main antagonist of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse in 2018, voiced by Liev Schreiber.
I killed Spider-Man. Why did I just see 2 more?
Then in 2021, he makes his grand MCU return in Hawkeye, where he's heavily tied to Echo and is a person who Clint Barton has had a past with. Now, there's a bit of an insane fan theory that I personally believe in, where people are kind of convinced that Charlie Cox's appearance in No Way Home and She-Hulk, and then Vincent's appearances in Hawkeye, were originally meant to be more like variants of the Netflix characters than straight up continuations of the Netflix characters, mainly because there's a lot of weird, like, conflicting things between Fisk and Hawkeye and Matt in She-Hulk and stuff that don't super jive with the characters we know from the Netflix show, and then that this changed by the time Echo and Born Again came out, and they were full-on continuations by then. And to be honest, I do kind of agree with this, because especially knowing that the original version of Born Again was not meant to be a continuation and was more meant to, like, hand wave away the Netflix stuff and do its own thing, I think it kind of makes sense that maybe when Hawkeye came out, they intended on this being like same actor but a new version of the character in a lot of ways. Anyway, after Hawkeye, Fisk returns in Echo in early 2024 to continue that story.
What you lacked was a place and a purpose. You have that now.
Which leads into his appearance in Born Again Season 1, where he is now the Mayor of New York, and that'll be continued in Season 1. And Wilson Fisk, or the Kingpin, was mentioned in these projects.
If he had an iron suit or a magic hammer, maybe that would explain why you keep getting your asses handed to you.
Next up is James Wesley, Wilson Fisk's main guy in Season 1 of the Netflix series. He's played by Toby Leonard Moore and only appears in 9 of the 39 episodes, all of which are in Season 1. In the show, he first shows up in episode 1 as one of Fisk's only real trusted people. He ends a lot of the meetings with members of the Hand and the Russians, and all of the business aspects so that Fisk doesn't have to get his hands dirty. Once Karen Page locates Fisk's mother and gets to meet her, Wesley goes to kill Karen, not expecting that she would kill him first. While he's mentioned throughout the rest of the show, his final appearance was in episode 11 of season 1. In the comics, Wesley is a lawyer who does not make his first appearance until Daredevil issue 227 in October 1985, which was the first issue of the Born Again arc. Just simply called Wesley in the comics at this point, it's made clear straight away that Wesley is Fisk's main person, and he's there when Fisk reads the letter revealing that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. This is also his only scene until he returns a little later on in the arc in issue 230, where Fisk makes him locate the supervillain Nuke, and this is again his only scene in the issue. In issue 221, Wesley is present at the meeting where Fisk meets all of his underlings. At the beginning of issue 223, while Fisk watches Nuke terrorize the city, Wesley is less enthused about the whole plot, fearing for what happens if everybody finds out that they are behind it. Believe it or not, outside of Born Again, Wesley was basically not much of a comic book character until the Netflix show came out and made him more associated with Kingpin and with, the Daredevil mythos again. Now, apparently he was featured in an original story from the UK Marvel imprint in a Spider-Man annual from 1986, but I could not find that comic for the life of me, so I don't know what he does in this story or if that's true, but apparently the story does not include Wilson Fisk. Wesley's last main Marvel Comics universe appearance until Netflix's Daredevil came out was in an issue of Alpha Flight from 1989, where Fisk tries to assassinate somebody and Wesley is there for it. After this, Wesley stayed gone from the comics until Fisk got his own miniseries in 2017 called Kingpin, where Wesley is representing Fisk and approaching a Sarah Dewey so that she'll write Fisk's book. Over the series, Wesley stands by mostly as a background character doing whatever Fisk wants, and towards the end of the arc, Sarah needs a lawyer and Wesley is the one who shows up. And while he was called James Wesley in the Netflix series 2 years earlier, this is the first time he's called James in the comics. He returns late in 2017 to Daredevil Comics again, with issue 23 of that run, where he's once again Fisk's crony with a slight redesign, this time setting certain villains like Tombstone up to help Fisk. In issue 597 of the same run, Wilson Fisk has become mayor, and in the following issue, Fisk makes him the mayoral chief of staff in New York. Book Cashman in Daredevil Born Again is extremely similar to what Wesley is in the comics. The Book Cashman is an existing comic book character, but I feel like in Born Again he might meant to be a stand-in for Wesley just by how he acts and just by how he sort of appears in the jobs he does. It just feels like that's kind of what Wesley does in the comics in the late 2010s, that I feel like maybe he's supposed to be Wesley. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, this arc continues with Wesley doing meetings with villains like Hammerhead, Diamondback, Black Cat for Fisk, all supervillains at the time, and all with Fisk wanting to put them in places of importance inside the government. In issue 600, Wesley informs Fisk about the hero uprising featuring Daredevil, leading a lot of New York heroes against Fisk's government. Following this with Matt in charge, he removes Wesley from the government, calling him Wesley Welch, which, considering this is the only time he's ever been called this in a comic, I think we can assume that this was Matt being a bit of a dick. In issue 605, Fisk returns, and with Matt quitting, Wesley is brought into the government once again. The main Wesley actually stays gone from comics for quite a while, resurfacing again in issue 1 from 2019, again with a slight redesign. Being silenced by Fisk as he hears that Daredevil is responsible for the death of a thief, and following this, Fisk puts Cole North on the Daredevil case, another character that Born Again fans will notice. And Wesley is there for all of this. In issue 3, Wesley informs Fisk that Daredevil has been shot by Cole after the manhunt. Then in late 2019, in The Punisher issues 13 and 14, Fisk begins teaming with Baron Zemo and other villains who he announces as the Thunderbolts against the Punisher. Wesley is once again present for all of this. Then in Daredevil issue 13 in early 2020, Fisk kills somebody in a fit of rage and Wesley has to help cover it up. Then Wesley helps kill someone to assist in covering the whole thing up. Wesley later shows up in the Ravencroft comic as Fisk has taken an interest in the prison for the criminally insane. Outside of the comics, Wesley has had some moments. In Trial of the Incredible Hulk from 1989, there's a character called Edgar that might be based on Wesley's character. He's played by Nicholas Horman.
Is this a perfect plan, Edgar?
Yes, well, no.
And in 2003, he does appear in the Daredevil film played by Leland Orser.
Wesley, handkerchief.
And he's mentioned throughout Daredevil Season 3 and also in a deleted scene from Daredevil Born Again Season 1.
Heroes and their consequences are why we have our current opportunities.
Okay, next up is kind of a tough one because we're talking about the Owl, who is, in my opinion, one of the stupidest Daredevil villains of all time. Not just Daredevil, one of the stupidest Marvel villains of all time. Yeah, you're going to see what I mean. Anyway, Leland Owsley is a pretty generic character inside of the Netflix show. He's a money man who works for Fisk and doesn't appear past the first season. Played by Bob Gunton, he also appears in 9 episodes just like Wesley and makes his first appearance in episode 1. His story ultimately played out quite tragically when towards the end of the season he becomes disillusioned by how Fisk is running things since meeting Vanessa, and so he tries to assassinate Vanessa. And Wilson deals with this by murdering Leland in the final episode of season 1. But in the comics, Leland is actually one of Daredevil's earliest supervillains, who goes by the name The Owl, and he's also one of his most prolific as well, showing up really often in the early comics. First showing up in Daredevil issue 3 from June 1964, he is also a money man, and in his first appearance he's talked about as a Wizard of Wall Street, and in the comics, as you can guess, he kind of looks like an owl. He has his own ridiculous owl lair that looks kind of like the Legion of Doom, and inside it he has his own owl throne, and he even has an owl that sits on his shoulder. He has his own ape cage that he makes people fight in. He has a crazy owl glider. I mean, I'm so happy they didn't try and do any of this in the Netflix show, honestly. He kidnaps Karen, so Daredevil surrenders, and then he puts both of them in these stupid fucking bird cages in a place he calls the aviary. And anyway, Daredevil frees himself and Karen, and he beats the owl, and the owl glides away onto a boat, and he escapes. Riveting stuff. Truly riveting stuff. Anyway, he doesn't stay gone for long. He's back for a 3-parter throughout Daredevil issues 20, 21, and 22 in 1966. But this time his glider is purple instead of green. Wow! Purple instead of green. Wow. It's revealed here that he actually got arrested after Daredevil issue 3, and he's now getting ready for a trial. And guess who his lawyer is? Matt Murdock. The Owl kidnaps the judge. That is so crazy about putting him in prison. So Daredevil tries to save the judge and he gets kidnapped too. And he's put inside of another one of those stupid bird cages. Daredevil obviously escapes, and then we see yet another one of Owl's crazy contraptions, his electronic owl. That is just this giant robot thing that the Owl uses to attack his enemies. And Daredevil successfully saves the judge and kind of controls the electronic owl so that he can get out of there. Owl once again escapes, and at the beginning of the next issue, it's revealed that Owl put a bomb inside of the electronic owl and blows it up, intending on killing Daredevil, but obviously that doesn't work. Now, the Owl actually does stay gone from the comics for a good few years after this, not resurfacing until Daredevil issue 80 from 1971, where he returns now working for a man named Mr. Klein. The Owl has an even bigger Owl helicopter this time. He escapes again by crashing his helicopter. For his big gigantic return, it's basically just his last appearance, but slightly bigger this time. It turns out though that Klein didn't want Owl to try and kill Daredevil, and he's pissed at Owl about that, so now Owl tries to attack Daredevil again, but this time Daredevil has Black Widow at his side, so that doesn't go well for the Owl. By 1973, the Owl has relocated to Chicago from San Francisco, and shows up in an issue of The Cat, because that was a Marvel comic for like a year. He has an even newer Owlcopter this time. He must just know the best people to make owl-themed aircraft. Like if I could do that, I would love to do that. Here's a question for everyone. If you could make like a load of aircraft, or like a throne, or like a giant layer, and theme it after an animal, what one would you pick? Would it be an owl? Is an owl an animal? Surely, right? Yeah, of course. Of course it is. Anyway, tell me which one you'd pick. In his appearance in The Cat, he tries to drain the memories and brains of people. And then in the 80s, over in Spider-Man's comics, he actually tries to become the new Kingpin, but obviously this did not go well. He eventually becomes a part of a group of 4 with Gladiator, Copperhead, and Stiltman, which was another attempt by Owl to become the new Kingpin. And after this, the Owl was put in prison around the same time that Daredevil was in the mid-2000s, and he had heard about Foggy's alleged death. And after some choice words about it, Matt brutally beat him. During the New Avengers a bit later, Owl was part of a group that did eventually escape from prison. Jumping ahead a bit to 2017, in issue 597, while Fisk is mayor, Wesley approaches the Owl and asks him to be in Fisk's new Department of Aging, and then by issue 600, Leland has been fully brought in as part of Fisk's supervillain government. He's forced to fight the Defenders Uprising of New York, where Daredevil leads Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, Moon Knight, Misty Knight, Spider-Man, and Echo against Fisk's government. Call me crazy, but I think we might see something a little similar in Born Again Season 2. In issue 2 from 2019, after Daredevil is being chased for a murder, he starts to wonder if someone is behind it, and someone he considers is the Owl. The Owl remains a villain that Fisk calls on whenever he needs groups. In issue 13 in 2020, with Fisk starting to lose his edge, the Owl even attempts a takeover. And outside of the comics, the Owl has only appeared in one thing that wasn't 2015's Daredevil, unlike everyone else from Marvel at the time, that was Spider-Man the Animated Series in the 90s, where he appeared in Season 2's premiere from 1995, voiced by Michael Bell.
Dares defy me now, Owl?
And in this episode, he was an insane criminal who was at one stage at Ravencroft, but now he is a crime lord along with Kingpin and Silvermane. And there you have it, that's the Owl. And we're not even through episode 1 yet.
You're dead. There is no such thing.
Next up, we have another fairly major villain from the show, but a character that actually does not have that much to do in the comics, and that is Nobu Yoshioka, played by Peter Shinkata, and he appears in 9 episodes of the show, with his first appearance being in episode 1. Now, he's a major player inside the Hand and is one of the few people in the show able to go toe-to-toe in combat with Daredevil. And when Matt thinks he's killed Nobu towards the end of season 1, he actually returns towards the end of season 2 to give Matt an idea about the power of resurrection and what the Hand are capable of. He does die for good in the finale of season 2 when Stick cuts him down pretty good. But in the comics, he's based on the character of Kagenobu Yoshioka, who is actually pretty obscure, has only ever appeared in one Marvel Comics series, which was the miniseries Elektra, the Hand from 2004 through 2005, and he is shown as one of the original major people in the Hand, actually kind of the founder of it in a lot of ways, and somebody who was there at the beginning of Resurrection. And in this, he's shown as a boy from centuries ago who was bullied by the other children due to his parentage. He returns home to find his mother being threatened, and he kills the man threatening her. Now, Nobu's mother is arrested and taken away for the death of that man, wanting to protect her son. And then with Nobu's mother due to be executed, he's taken to a school to train and learn his skills. After 10 years of training, he wins his graduation fight and is made a samurai. He becomes known as the lone swordsman who wears the hand, as he has like a black hand on the back of the costume he wears. He's got a black hand on the back of it. And soon after, his old samurai master dies, and the samurai's final request is that Nobu return to his school and assume leadership of it. So with his return to the school and with a disdain for the direction that Japan is heading, Nobu creates the Hand, creating the ideology surrounding the 5 fingers of the Hand, and with this, Nobu begins leading the new Hand in a war against the government. Over the next few years, Nobu begins to organize the Hand and lead them properly, and Nobu also begins training a young woman called Eliza in the ways of the Hand, a woman that he begins to care deeply about, to the point where they actually fall in love with each other, and they begin fighting the Hand's enemies together. Later on, Eliza survives an assassination attempt from a member of the Hand, so Nobu fights and kills the person responsible. They both realize that the entire Hand is turned on them, and so they set out for revenge. They spend a while fighting the leaders and armies of the Hand, but Nobu's story ends tragically in the comics with him injured badly by the Hand, leaving Eliza to mercy kill him. And that's it. That's pretty much his entire comic book history. So it's cool that they dug into a character who appeared in barely in 5 issues and made him such an integral part of the Daredevil show. Outside of the comics, Kagenobu has only ever shown up in 2015's Daredevil, but he also received a mention in The Defenders, along with us meeting all of the fingers on the Hand for the first time.
Which one trumps the other?
Next up is Ben Urich, who has a long history in the Daredevil comics. Played by Von D. Curtis Hall, he shows up for 9 episodes of the show, all of which are in season 1. And while he doesn't first show up until episode 3 of this season, he is first mentioned in season 1, episode 1. And throughout season 1, he's one of the main driving forces looking into Union Allied, the Russians, and who the king behind all of it is, being one of the last true and proper journalists in New York City. He's also one of the main drive inspirations for Karen leaving her pain and her old life behind her and becoming who she truly wants to be. And when Urich and Karen pay a visit to Fisk's mother later on in the season, Fisk takes this badly and goes to Urich's house and kills him brutally. His absence is felt throughout the entire rest of the show, however, and he's easily one of the biggest influences on Karen's direction and who she is for the remainder of the show's run. In the comics, Ben does actually have one of the later entrances of the characters that we're talking about, not debuting until 1978 in Daredevil issue 153, where Ben's a reporter for the Daily Bugle used to covering police-related incidents. He begins covering some recent events involving Daredevil and Heather Glenn, trying to find the connection between the two people, and in the very first issue he's in, he puts himself in danger trying to get the best story of Daredevil's current fight with Cobra and Hyde. Urich's attitude like this is really seen in the show in season 1 episode 5 when he's putting himself in danger to figure out what's going on between the Masked Man and the Russians. Ben returns to Daredevil in issue 159 a full year later, this time being convinced that there's something more to who Matt Murdock is. And at the end of the issue, Ben reports on Black Widow returning to New York, which puts her right in the crosshairs of Bullseye. Following this, Matt actually goes to Ben Urich as Daredevil, wanting any information on Bullseye, and Ben in return wants to know if Daredevil knows Matt Murdock because he already senses a tie between the two people. Ben continues to investigate the connection between Matt and Daredevil, and it doesn't take him long to figure it out, paying visits to people who knew Matt's dad, Jack Murdock, learning about Matt's childhood and how the kids would call him Daredevil as a nickname. So within his first 4 comic book appearances, Ben pretty single-handedly figures out that Matt Murdock is in fact Daredevil, really showcasing immediately how good of a journalist he is, a reporter he is, and an investigator that he is. Jumping forward a few months to 1980, Ben is on the front lines watching Daredevil battle Hulk in New York when he notices Heather Glenn, Matt's current love interest, standing on the sides watching, and as she yells Matt, that is the final clue that Ben needs to really put it together in his head that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. So Ben starts writing the story of his career, that Matt Murdock and Daredevil are one and the same. And in issue 164, Matt is in the hospital after his fight with Hulk. Badly wounded, Matt is visited by heroes from all across the Marvel Universe until Ben Urich comes to visit and tells him that he's planning a story about Matt Murdock being Daredevil, and Matt just straight up admits it's true, feeling like, Ben's got all the pieces, I'm not going to deny it. Matt ends up telling Ben about his father and his childhood, and after hearing all of this, Ben actually decides to scrap the story and help keep Matt's secret. Ben returns later on in late 1981 in Daredevil issue 174, where he's watching Matt Murdock defending Melvin Potter, aka the Gladiator, in court. In issue 176, he's writing a piece on Randolph Cherry and his election run, who is a corrupt politician, another character we're going to get to in a little bit, with Ben taking aim at the mayor candidate that Kingpin is supporting. This puts Urich in Fisk's sight. Later on that year, over in Spider-Man's comics, Urich covers a recent Punisher shooting and is tasked by Jameson to try and find a connection between Spider-Man and the Punisher. Ben continues investigating Cherry over in the pages of Daredevil, and in issue 179 he looks deeper into Fisk's connection to the man. But now Elektra is cleaning up house and kills Ben's informant in front of him. She then tells Ben that if he continues investigating Cherry or doing anything to stop him being elected mayor, she'll kill him too. Still knowing that Matt is Daredevil, Ben calls him to help, and when he tells Matt about her, Matt immediately knows that it's Elektra. After this, Ben goes to meet with Cherry, and is not just threatened, but roughed up by his men, but thankfully Daredevil comes to the rescue. Ben finds out that Cherry is going to meet with Kingpin, and that he needs pictures, but Daredevil warns him to stay away to be safe. But Ben's not the kind of reporter who's going to do that. When Ben goes to take pictures of Fisk and Cherry, he sees none other than Vanessa Fisk, who has been missing and presumed dead, but Ben does not recognize her at this point. Ben ends up seeing both Daredevil and Elektra fighting and takes pictures of it where he's able to tell the connection between the two people. Unfortunately for Ben though, due to his smoking and coughing, he coughs a lot, so as soon as Elektra beats Matt, she spots Ben, and then sends a severely brutal message to Ben to make sure he backs off. Following this, Ben does in fact back off, realizing his life is far more important than the current story he's working on. And when looking at his pictures, he does realize that the woman he saw was in fact Vanessa Fisk. So Ben contacts Daredevil and the two begin investigating this. But Matt decides to take all of it on himself, so Ben tries to leave, but is grabbed and taken down to the King of the Sewers of New York, which is also where Vanessa Fisk is being held. Ben and Matt are dropped into the water to be fed to an alligator, but thanks to Matt, they get free. Sometime later, Matt visits Ben again, this time to get information on the Punisher. And Ben keeps being used in this capacity for a while, where he shows up in Spider-Man or Daredevil, mainly just so that the heroes can get information on whatever their current villain of the week is. He shows up in Amazing Spider-Man being asked about people like Norton, where he teams up with Peter Parker, and Peter has to save Ben from the tarantula. At one point, Ben thinks Daredevil has shown up to save him until he realizes it's Spider-Man. And in the following issue, Ben even gives Peter a quick tutorial on camera focus. Following this, Ben switches between showing up in Spider-Man and showing up in Daredevil pretty regularly. Ben returns to Daredevil in early 1983 with issue 192, where he's once again investigating corruption, which puts him in the eyes of more killers. Ben tries to buy a house, not knowing that the Masked Marauder's brother has been hired by Fisk to run a scheme, another character we're going to get to in a little bit. And then over in his next appearance in Amazing Spider-Man issue 243, Ben is writing a story on this very thing. In issue 198 of Daredevil, Ben helps Matt look into the villain Lord Darkwind. Again, another character we're going to be talking about in a little bit. You really get a sense that a lot of Netflix's Daredevil was really built around this era of comics. Like, so many comics that are so important to that show really show up in this sort of era of comics from like the late 70s through to the mid 80s. A lot of just the foundation of that show is really steeped in the lore from these comics. It's really exciting to actually see Born Again and how that sort of delves into the more recent comic runs when Netflix's Daredevil was so much about like the 80s through the 90s of Daredevil in comics. I know, I just find that kind of cool. But Ben is a pretty important character once again when Born Again rolls around in 1985 and 1986. He's the person writing articles on the murder of the police officer Nick Milanis, and he pushes that Nick was killed because he was going to reveal that Kingpin was framing Matt Murdock. Ben returns home to find out that one of Fisk's people is actually trying to kill his wife Doris, and it's right around then that Matt Murdock returns to help. Ben's happy that Matt's alive, but can't celebrate too long because Melvin Potter, aka the Gladiator, contacts him. And that was kind of just a broad overview of Ben's early history, but later on in the comics, he becomes both kind of a Spider-Man and Daredevil character interchangeably throughout the rest of his Marvel Comics history. He was the person responsible for revealing that Norman Osborn is Green Goblin to the world, even if this was a short-lived revelation. He was unwittingly used as a pawn by Kingpin to lead the FBI to Matt Murdock's location, and he was partly responsible for the world finding out that Matt Murdock was in fact Daredevil. When this was confirmed to the world, Ben Urich actually refused to write that article for J. Jonah Jameson. And during Civil War in the late 2000s, Ben was also one of the main journalists covering a lot of what was happening with Iron Man's side of that war. He continued to cover major events in the Marvel Universe with things like World War Hulk and the Skrulls' secret invasion. Urich's a character I do think could have benefited from being used a little bit more in the Netflix show. Like, I get that they needed somebody to kill at the end of season 1 to show how brutal Kingpin was. That was actually a mandate from Marvel, where they said before the writers even came in, look, you've got to pick one character from the show, kill him at the end of the season to show who Wilson Fisk is. And they picked Ben Urich because he was kind of the only character they didn't have major plans for going forward. But I would have liked to have seen Ben Urich be used more, especially with when things like Born Again came around in season 3, that we could have seen his use on that. It would have been cool to see like a version of the story where he finds out that Matt Murdock is Daredevil and what he kind of does with that information, seeing him decide not to publish the story about that inside the series. I would have loved to see stuff like that. But Ben's only actual appearance outside of the Netflix show is in 2003's Daredevil film.
Justice is blind.
Where he's played by Joe Pantoliano, and here he works for the New York Post instead of the Daily Bugle. And very similarly to the comics, here he also finds out that Matt Murdock is Daredevil, and here he also decides not to do anything about it. Just like Karen Page and Luke Cage, he receives a mention in Cloak and Dagger Season 2.
When I was undercover, I kept case notes on playing cards. I learned it from this reporter in New York.
In the third episode of the season, Bridget O'Reilly, who is a detective in that show, mentions how she learned to use playing cards in an investigation from a New York reporter, that reporter being Ben Urich. He's also mentioned in Daredevil Born Again Season 1, when his daughter now runs a news program called the BB Report and begins working for Fisk, so his legacy lives on way past his death in the Netflix series.
Guilt can be a good thing. It's a soul's call to action.
Paul Lantom is played by Peter McRobbie and appears in 10 episodes throughout all 3 seasons of Daredevil. First appearing in episode 1, he's a priest that Matt often confides in and goes to when he's having a conflict of faith, and Matt first met him as a child after the death of his father, and Paul was one of the people who helped save him, as well as knowing his mother was a nun in the church. Paul saves Matt after he survives the events of the Defenders and helps heal him and get him back to full strength. Unfortunately though, Bullseye comes looking for Karen Page later on that season, and Bullseye kills Paul when he tries to protect Karen. One of the last scenes in the entire show is Paul Lantom's funeral. In the comics, he was obviously a priest, but he never actually appeared in Daredevil's comics. He was strictly a Runaways character for his really brief comic book stint. First appearing in Runaways issue 9 from late 2005, where he shows up at a hospital where Dagger has been badly injured, reportedly by Cloak. And then the New Avengers featuring Captain America, Spider-Woman, and Luke Cage have shown up to try and bring Cloak in. In the following issue, it's revealed that Father Lantom has been giving sanctuary to both Cloak and Dagger for months. And it's also just after this that Cloak introduces the Runaways to the priest. He's also extremely freaked out by the Runaways' dinosaur, Old Lace. But hey, who wouldn't be? Father Lantom thinks that Cloak is innocent and didn't hurt Dagger as well, and he shows him the surveillance footage of the night that Dagger was attacked. Lantom then looks after Molly while the rest of the Runaways go after drug dealers. And in the next issue, Lantom gives Molly a phone so that she can call if she ever wants a family, but she declines, saying that the Runaways are her real family. This conversation then ends when Captain America, Iron Man, and Wolverine show up wanting to ask the priest some questions, which leads Captain America to recognize Molly as one of the Runaways' children, so Wolverine tries to take her from Father Lantom. And this continues into the 4th and final issue of Lantom's appearances in Runaways, where Cloak returns and makes the Avengers stand down. Cloak then takes Molly and vanishes, while Father Lantom is left with the Avengers. And that was all they wrote on that character for 20 years until January of this year, where he returned to Marvel Comics 20 years later in Avengers Academy Marvel's Voices, where he's taking confession of a Daredevil character known as Blackheart until Daredevil arrives and fights him. And this is definitely a little nod to Marvel Netflix's Daredevil, because before this in Marvel Comics, Father Lantom was only ever associated with the Runaways. So to have him brought back to comics 20 years later, and this time he's being used in Daredevil's capacity, really does show that there's a bit of synergy there with the Netflix show. Outside of Netflix's Daredevil, Paul Lantom has only had one other appearance, which was also in the Marvel Netflix universe, in The Defenders in 2017. In this episode, Matt visits Father Lantom for confessional, and they discuss Elektra and Matt leaving behind the life of Daredevil.
I guarantee this baby will not jam, or my name ain't Turk Barrett.
Turk Barrett is a semi-recurring small criminal in Daredevil, played by Rob Morgan, and he appears in 7 episodes spread throughout the first 2 seasons. usually someone that Matt finds and ruffles up for a bit of information because he always has his ear to the ground with the criminal elements. At the end of season 2, he's kidnapped by the Hand along with Karen Page and some others. But in the comics, Turk has actually been around for a long time, and just like the show, he is this small-time criminal that when Daredevil shows up, he usually gives up pretty easily. He's also a pretty good friend of Grotto, another character from the show that we'll talk about in a little bit. Turk first showed up in Daredevil issue 69 from late 1970, where Daredevil teams up with Black Panther. In this issue, Turk is a thief that's part of a group called the Thunderbolts. Not that one. Daredevil catches him in the act, a kid then gets injured, which draw the attention of Black Panther, and Black Panther completely destroys them in a fight. After this, Turk stays absent from the comics for an entire 9 years, which is insane, but then he returns all the way in Daredevil issue 159 in July of 1979. And here his role as a small-time criminal that's beaten and then interrogated by Daredevil is really established, as that's exactly what happens to him. This continues for a while. Daredevil goes to Turk for information on Bullseye, and in the following issue, Turk is running scared from him because Matt's on a warpath to find Bullseye at all costs, who currently has Black Widow. Turk's back in late 1980 in issue 168, which is also Elektra's first appearance in the comics. And in this comic, Turk is pretending to be blind so that Daredevil doesn't beat him up and demand information. But of course, a disguise like this isn't going to work on a man like Matt Murdock, and Turk has information on a man named Ulrich Wallenquist, and unknown to Turk or Daredevil is that Elektra is on the way to capture that very man. In Daredevil issue 180, Daredevil, who has his leg injured from a recent fight with Elektra, finds Turk along with Grotto and beats them up a little bit. 2 issues later, Turk was in prison with Grotto and breaks out at the same time that Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, does. And in issue 186, knowing the Kingpin is looking for a new assassin, Turk shows up and tries to be the new Stiltman, and Fisk is like, "What are you playing at? Why would I hire an idiot like you to be my new assassin? I have far more important people to be dealing with right now. Get out of my face, Turk." Turk and Grotto also like to frequent Josie's, which is a problem when Daredevil and Wolverine show up and kick both out. But they're both back in issue 200 when Grotto runs away, but Turk is questioned by Daredevil to see if he knows once again where Bullseye is. In 1989, Turk was actually responsible for blowing up Josie's while in a fight with Daredevil during Marvel Comics Presents issue 9. In more recent years, Turk has remained a low-level bad guy for Daredevil and getting dragged into whatever bullshit is currently going on in the Marvel Universe at any one time. Like in Civil War, he was first to deal with the Iron Man side. In some of the Infinity events, Turk Barrett also got the Mind Stone for some reason at around this point, which led him to Doctor Strange. I don't know, crazy time in Marvel Comics. Turk's only appearance outside the Marvel Netflix universe happened in 1989 in the film Trial of the Incredible Hulk, which was also the first live-action appearances of Kingpin and Daredevil. And this he was played by Mark Atkinson. Here he was similar to the comics where he has a small-time criminal, but Daredevil would always go to him for information. First to find David Banner, which was Hulk's name in this series. Later on, Kingpin pays him off to lure Daredevil into a trap, which he does, which ends up with Turk being arrested at the end. After this, he appeared in Netflix's Daredevil, but outside of Daredevil, he has had cameo appearances in every other Marvel Netflix show, usually always getting ruffled up a bit by the main heroes for information. He first appeared in episodes 2 and 12 of Luke Cage Season 1, then episode 2 of The Defenders, then episode 4 of The Punisher Season 1, then episode 12 of Jessica Jones Season 2, then episode 10 of Luke Cage Season 2, then episode 2 of Iron Fist Season 2, and finally episode 5 of The Punisher Season 2. So this guy kind of appeared almost as much as the main heroes did, which is kind of crazy.
Never see Serpico? Honest cops are usually the ones get shot in the face.
Brett Mahoney was a police officer, later police detective, and longtime semi-friend, semi-annoyed by Foggy Nelson and Matt Murdock. Played by Royce Johnson, he appears in 18 of Daredevil's episodes, almost half, so he's a pretty substantial presence on the show, with his first episode being the very first one. And despite sometimes being annoyed, it's clear he's got respect for Foggy and Matt, being some of the only non-corrupt people in the business. One of my favorite moments from the show actually comes from season 3, when he puts himself between Fisk's corrupt FBI and Foggy and Karen, because the FBI are going to get Foggy and Karen and kill them if they get their hands on them.
He's a suspected accomplice to murder. That's state law.
And she's here to surrender to the NYPD.
Shut up.
It shows how much of a good guy he is. He's willing to put himself in the way of this. In the comics, Brett has a pretty small history. First appearing in Marvel Comics Presents issue 1 from 2007, he was a detective at the 27th Precinct of the New York Police Department. Throughout his history, he was partnered with a woman from the Ghost Rider comics called Stacy Dolan. With her, they'd investigate some supernatural-related incidents, which would also lead them into characters like Spider-Man and some of the X-Men like Wolverine and Storm investigating some mutant deaths. But not a whole lot to his character. He only appeared 9 times from 2007 to 2017, and he hasn't been seen since. I think Brett's similar to Father Paul Lantham, where it's interesting that the writers of the Netflix series would pick 2 relatively obscure characters from the comics that don't have much association with Daredevil as a character, but they put him in this world anyway. Like, I don't know, I kind of love that stuff, that like, I like when comic book shows will pick already existing Marvel Comics characters and use them in a specific place, even if they're not necessarily tied to the characters they're being introduced beside. Rather than using original characters, I just think that it shows a little bit more of a love for the source material than if a show is mostly original characters with one character who's like a major comic book character. But I don't know, that's just me. Outside of Daredevil, Brett also has a huge presence throughout the wider Marvel Netflix universe, appearing in episode 7 of Jessica Jones Season 1, episode 10 of The Punisher Season 1, and appearing in 8 episodes of The Punisher Season 2, basically being one of the more used characters that season. He's very much like Turk, where he's around a lot, and while not fully confirmed yet, he's heavily rumored to be in Born Again Season 2 next year.
There's plenty of room over there, do you mind?
So this one might not be completely accurate, but Clyde Farnham is a character who appears in just the first episode of Daredevil Season 1. He's played by J. Tucker Smith and is forced to try and kill Karen Page, or Fisk and Wesley will kill his daughter. After this, he has killed him, and he doesn't appear again in the show, obviously, after that. But in the comics, a longtime Daredevil villain goes by the name Masked Marauder, and his real name is Frank Farnham, so I think it's reasonable to assume that Clyde is meant to be a heavily loose adaptation of this villain. First appearing in Daredevil issue 16 from March 1966, he started out as the building manager of where Nelson and Murdock was originally located. He's actually the reason that Spider-Man comes over in that issue by having people dress up like Daredevil and attack Spider-Man, which causes Spider-Man to attack the real Daredevil. In issue 22 of Daredevil from late 1966, Marauder teams up with Melvin Potter, aka the Gladiator, and they create a supervillain android called the Tri-Man to try and defeat Daredevil. This is also the same issue that Daredevil flies L's electronic L back to New York, so that was a bad day for the man without fear. Tri-Man is defeated, but Gladiator and Marauder have taken Karen and Foggy prisoner while Daredevil was distracted. Masked Marauder's plan fails in the end, however. He becomes obsessed with finding out Daredevil's real identity after that, so in issue 27 he teams up with another recurring Daredevil villain, Stiltman, and tries to figure it out through one of his weird machines, but his machine disintegrates him, and he is believed dead. In Daredevil issue 192, his brother is hired by Fisk to pretend to be a house salesman and trick Ben Urich into buying a house, so his legacy does survive. And he did technically survive and come back way later on in the comics after that, but it was weird, and, his main history comes from these early Daredevil comics. And he's never appeared in anything outside of Daredevil, so with that, we're finally finished with episode 1. Yeah, that was just the first episode. Jesus, man. Wait, no it isn't, because we're not done yet, because that's just the appearances from episode 1. But Daredevil is the kind of show that is usually very front-heavy in its comic book character appearances. It'll have a lot of its character appearances very early in the season that are from the comics, so usually you'll have a bunch of that like in the first episode, and they'll be huge for the remainder of the season, and then that'll be that. So it won't be as intensive for the rest of this video, but that is just the appearances from episode 1. We still have the references and mentions from episode 1, so let's get through them really quick. Not going to spend too long on the references and mentions because I will be here forever. But first up, the Rand Enterprises truck that blinds Matt is clearly a reference to Danny Rand, aka Iron Fist, a huge character in the Marvel Netflix universe. Mentions about him and his company continue all throughout the show, all the way until the final episode of season 3, and he's also obviously a big comic book character. There is a Cornelius Van Lunt or Taurus reference in episode 1 and also in episode 10. This refers to an Avengers villain from the 60s. There's a Don Rigoletto reference, who in the comics is from Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, and the man that Fisk toppled to get to the top, which is also true in the show. The drugs that Gao is making and are seen throughout the show have a symbol that is a reference to the Steel Serpent, aka Davos, who is a major Iron Fist comics villain and played a sizable role in both seasons of Iron Fist. And the final reference in episode 1 comes from Jack Murdock's Boxing Days, where he fought Carl Creel, aka the Absorbing Man, a longtime Marvel villain and someone that has also been in the MCU in a bunch of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. episodes. And that's all of episode 1. Wow. This is like an hour and a half, and we're done one episode. But like I said, you kind of get a lot of the big characters out of the way pretty quickly in these seasons. I think the only other big characters we have to go over that are going to take some time are people like Elektra, the Punisher, and Bullseye. Everyone else is pretty brief and will be like 2-3 minutes of talk, so don't worry. Stay comfortable though, because we still have a decent amount to get through.
I'm impervious to bad attitude. So you can throw your self-pitying bullshit at me all day, Murdock, and I'll still be standing right here.
Maggie Grace is the mother of Matt Murdock, and while she doesn't appear in the show until season 3, episode 1, her voice is heard as early as season 1, episode 2, played by Joanne Whalley. She appears in 9 episodes of the show, and in season 3, she's the nun who takes primary interest in Matt Murdock and his recovery after the events of the Defenders. While it isn't known to Matt or the audience yet that she is Matt's long-lost mother, that is revealed much later on down the line. In fitting form, her being alive is also revealed in the Born Again issues from 1986, where she also finds and helps Matt after he is badly injured. We did discuss a decent bit about her when talking about battling Jack and his origin comics, so no point super revisiting a lot of that. You're going to find out a lot of this with a lot of these later characters we're going to be talking about. That's some of them, especially that are associated to main characters we've talked about. I don't touch on them nearly enough because we kind of covered a lot of the major comics already to do with them, so get used to me not repeating myself a whole lot. But she was also present during the arc in the late 90s when Matt was protecting the Antichrist child, another arc we talked about earlier, and Bullseye and Mysterio come looking, and Bullseye brutally tears up a church and everyone inside. Maggie is injured and is trying to hide, and Karen tries to help her before Bullseye kills Karen. Maggie was able to keep the baby hidden despite some of her sisters in the church being tortured and killed by Bullseye. Outside of this, Maggie actually doesn't show up in the comics as much as you would think, considering her being Matt's only living parent. She returns again in the early 2000s for the Battle and Jack Murdock miniseries, where we learn a bit more about her years with Jack and when she dropped Matt off to Jack. Outside of Netflix's Daredevil, she could technically be considered as having been in 2003's Daredevil. She gets a mention in the theatrical cut, but in the director's cut there was a nun played by Vivian Palmero Winter that could be her. I don't know. You can argue that if you want. She then gets mentions in The Defenders and in Born Again Season 1, and in 2018 she's briefly seen in a photo in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse.
You could do so much better, love.
Thank you, Josie, but this is my employee.
Next up is Josie, who runs her own pub right beside where Matt and Foggy work in early Daredevil. Played by Susan Varon, she appears in just 9 episodes of the show, spread throughout the first 2 seasons. Her first episode is the second episode of Season 1, and her final episode is the finale of Season 2. Her pub is constantly the one that Foggy, Matt, and Karen find themselves in when a case goes right or wrong. In issue 160, Josie has to shut down a fight that Turk Barrett starts in the pub. In Daredevil issue 196, Daredevil, who's recently teamed up with Wolverine, decides to bring Wolverine to Josie's. But Marvel Comics presents issue 19 in 1989. Josie's unfortunately is blown up by a grenade during a fight between Daredevil and some people, including Turk Barrett. But new Josie's pub was eventually built. In the comics, she's okay with certain criminal dealings happening inside the pub, but execution and murders are strictly off limits. During the Battle and Jack Murdock comic in the early 2000s, Josie was revealed to have been a brief love interest to Jack Murdock at a time. And Josie is in 2003's Daredevil, played by Josie DeVenso.
Got a lot of nerve coming in here after what you did.
Didn't you hear? I'm innocent, baby.
And outside of Netflix's Daredevil, she has appearances in The Defenders in the second episode, and she also returned for Born Again in the first 8 and 9 episodes. And due to how Season 1 ended with her being part of Mart's Uprising, I feel like it's pretty likely she'll be back for Season 2.
Alright, I'll call you Mike.
Mike?
Yeah, a guy I used to date. Turns out he was very good at keeping secrets too.
Next up is kind of an awkward one because we're talking about a well-known character from the show in Claire Temple. Played by Rosario Dawson, she appears in 8 episodes of Daredevil, spread throughout the first and second seasons, with her first appearance being in Season 1, Episode 2, and she's a nurse that Matt goes to when he needs stitching up. Matt also helps protect her and her apartment from the Russians, and in Season 2 she becomes a slight target for the Hand, and her final episode in the show is in Season 2, Episode 11. But the reason why this is kind of an awkward one is that Claire in the Netflix shows is kind of an amalgamation of a few different Marvel Comics characters, because Claire Temple does exist in Marvel Comics. She was originally a Luke Cage character from Heroes for Hire issue 2 in May of 1972. After Luke was attacked by Diamondback, she helps him as she's a nurse, which is actually something that is very much played similarly in Luke Cage Season 1. And after a while, both Claire and Luke fall in love and become a romantic couple, which is again something that Luke Cage Season 1 deals with. Claire in the comics stays quite tied to the characters from the Netflix show, however. She gets swept up in a murder case and is accused of murder until a lawyer called Big Ben Donovan clears her name, this being a character we're going to touch on in a little bit. In Power-Man issue 18, Claire goes to the grave of Reva Connors with Luke, a plot and character that was also heavily used in Jessica Jones Season 1 as well as Luke Cage Season 1. Claire's ex-husband was the character of Bill Foster, aka Goliath, who was played by Lawrence Fishburne in the MCU. And Claire and Luke did eventually part ways, but Claire remained a nurse for various Marvel heroes, like Spider-Man, Sam Wilson's Captain America, Danny Rand's Iron Fist, and Joaquin Torres. Her comic book history, though, is very sporadic, and while she semi-regularly appeared in Luke Cage and Iron Fist comics throughout the 1970s and 1980s, she mostly disappeared after that, not resurfacing until Captain America's comics in 2015 and 2016, likely in a slight attempt at synergy since the character just debuted in the Daredevil Netflix series that same year. Her most recent appearances were in Spider-Man comics in 2018. But the reason this is slightly different is that Night Nurse is often what Claire is referred to as by, I guess, the wider fandom, some of the writers inside the show a little bit as well. But Night Nurse in the Marvel Comics is a broad term for multiple characters in the Marvel Universe. Like, Night Nurse Clinic is a specific place in Marvel Comics that exists to help superheroes. But in its first appearances in Marvel Comics, Night Nurse was a title reserved for characters like Linda Carter, a character from Linda Carter Student Nurse, issue 1 from June 1961. So actually one of the very first comics in the new era of Marvel Comics, the era that came about with characters like Spider-Man appearing in Amazing Fantasy, Daredevil, Fantastic Four. A lot of these characters showing up for the first time. Linda Carter's version of Night Nurse showed up around the same time. And the Linda Carter version of Night Nurse has helped characters like Daredevil on a number of occasions, along with characters like Steve Rogers' Captain America and Doctor Strange. So I think Claire Temple in the MCU is meant to be a lot of Claire's personality from the comics, but with a slight bit of Linda Carter painted over it. Another comic book Night Nurse is actually Christine Palmer, who is played by Rachel McAdams in both Doctor Strange films. Outside of the comics, Linda Carter gets a quick reference in The Defenders episode 8 as a doctor that helped Misty Knight, this likely being a little Easter egg to Linda and Claire being very similar characters. Claire Temple only ever appears in the Marvel Netflix universe, but she has a substantial presence across all the shows, appearing in the season 1 finale of Jessica Jones, where she helps Jessica and meets Luke Cage for the first time. This then leads into Luke Cage season 1, where she appears in 8 whole episodes of the season, having a pretty huge appearance. She then returns for Iron Fist season 1, appearing in 6 episodes, also supporting the main cast of that show, and later that year she has another big impact as a main cast member in The Defenders. And the final time she shows up in the Marvel Netflix universe is for the first 3 episodes of Luke Cage season 2, where she leaves Luke.
Did he just say pass?
I appreciate everything you've done for me. Really, I do.
Roscoe Sweeney is played by Kevin Nagel and appears in just 2 episodes of the show, with both episodes being in a flashback capacity. He first appears in season 1 episode 2 as one of the people setting up Jack Murdock's next boxing match, where he's supposed to take a dive, and when Jack doesn't do it, Roscoe has him killed. He then returns in season 2 episode 5, where we get flashbacks to when Matt meets Elektra, and upon hearing about Matt's life, Elektra helps Matt get some revenge on Roscoe, although he leaves the episode alive, just slightly unconscious, and in handcuffs. We're right back to Daredevil issue 1 from 1964 with this guy, as that's when he shows up for the first time, and that's also when he dies. Called a fixer in the comics, he does the exact same thing as in the show and sets up Jack for a fight that he just won't do, so then he kills Jack. Unlike the show though, Roscoe dies when Matt is pursuing him as Daredevil, where Roscoe has a heart attack because of how scared he is and how much he's trying to run away. He mostly appears in flashbacks to Matt's origin throughout his brief Marvel history, also returning in The Man Without Fear in the 90s to reinvent Matt's origin, and then returning again in Battling Jack Murdock in the early 2000s, which reinvents Jack's final years. Outside of Daredevil in 2015 and 2016, Roscoe only ever appears in 2003's Daredevil, where he's called Fallon instead of Roscoe Sweeney. Here he's played by Mark Magalus.
They're all my fighters. Just like you.
You dropping the 5th. We're clearing 70%.
Next up is the man who works with Roscoe, Sammy Silk, who only appears once on an episode 2 of season 1 and is played by Peter Garrity. Not a lot to say about this character that wasn't covered with Roscoe, except for a slight fun fact that he was a last-minute addition after Peter Garrity was supposed to play Leland Owsley in this scene and in the rest of the show, but then the actor injured his knee and was replaced for the rest of the show, and Leland's name here was switched with Sammy. In the comics, he is a much later addition than Roscoe, not appearing until Daredevil issue 26 from late 2001, and here he is called Samuel Silk Jr. In the comics, he was a longtime friend of Richard Fisk, who was Kingpin's son that we talked about a lot earlier, and once he found out that Kingpin knew that Daredevil was Matt Murdock, but still allowed him to mess with their operations, he actually tried to assassinate Kingpin. We mentioned earlier that Richard died during an attempt to remove Kingpin. Well, this was that attempt. Samuel tries and fails, gets retaliated against by Vanessa, who kills Richard instead. We also mentioned earlier that Ben Urich helped the FBI get to Matt Murdock's location after learning his identity. The FBI learned the identity from Samuel Silk, giving them his name as Daredevil so that they'd protect him from Fisk. This didn't last long though, because when Samuel was put in prison, he was killed by Wilson Fisk personally in Daredevil issue 45, less than 2 years after his first appearance, and he never appeared outside of the comics after this.
If Agent Poindexter is useful, perhaps he can help us with this problem.
Vanessa is a major player in seasons 1 and 3 of the show, played by Ayelet Zurer. She appears in 11 episodes of the show, and first as Vanessa Mariana. Her first appearance is in episode 3 and remains a part of the rest of the season. Her character works in an art museum, and Fisk comes in obsessed with a certain painting called Rabbit in a Snowstorm, and Vanessa and Wilson slowly fall in love after this. While at first she's weary and scared about his criminal side, she does eventually become complicit in the whole thing. When Fisk is taken down and sent to prison at the end of season 1, Vanessa is taken abroad to be hidden and kept safe until Wilson can get free. which he does in Season 3, which brings Vanessa back to him in New York. She is ultimately the key that Matt uses to make Fisk go back to prison, threatening her. Now, we did cover a lot about Vanessa already when talking about Wilson, so no point going over a lot of it again. Her name in the comics is Vanessa Mariana, but in Amazing Spider-Man issue 71, after a stint where Wilson is being all antsy about her being mentioned, she rescues him, although she remains unseen, because they really want a mystery about who. In Fisk's next appearance in Amazing Spider-Man issue 83 from early 1970, she pops up as his wife and wonders if her son Richard is alive, who was later revealed to be a Spider-Man villain. After this, the Fisk family become the new heads of Hydra, then they aren't. Then they are back in Spider-Man where Fisk almost dies and she resents Spider-Man for it, but half forgives him because Spider-Man saved Richard's life. When Wilson comes back from the dead, she gives him an ultimatum that he has 24 hours to get out of his criminal life, and Wilson uses those 24 hours to try and kill Spider-Man. When time runs out, Vanessa demands a decision, and Wilson chooses her over killing Spider-Man. When she comes over to Daredevil in 1980, she is kidnapped by Bullseye and the mob, and she seemingly dies in similar fashion to Wilson years ago. But she doesn't actually die and is taken by the King of the Sewers of New York, where she remains until in Daredevil issue 179, Vanessa, with her brain a mess and alive, tries to follow Fisk. And Ben Urich gets pictures of her, but he doesn't know it's her at this point. In the following issue, we find out where she's been, seeing her in a sewer with some pretty scary creatures, and Ben realizes it was probably Vanessa he saw. So he tells Daredevil he thinks it's her, and Matt goes into the sewers to check for himself. Matt finds Vanessa as the queen of the King of the Sewers of New York. That's a mouthful. And this guy doesn't want to let his queen go. So Matt defeats the king, and Vanessa and the rest of the sewers call Daredevil the new king. Getting her ring from her, Matt then uses this to tell Fisk that he has Vanessa, and that he'll only give Vanessa to him if Fisk agrees to pull his corrupt candidate, Randolph Cherry, from being elected New York's mayor. Vanessa spends a lot of time after this bedridden, while Fisk tries to restore her mind to what it once was. Around this time, Punisher actually kidnaps her and Wilson puts a beatdown on him, and then following this, Vanessa actually separates with Wilson for a bit, but returns once the attempt on Fisk's life happens with Samuel Silk. It's actually her that tries to get revenge on Samuel, which results in her killing her son, Richard. Vanessa then separated from Wilson again after this, knowing that he would never forgive her for killing Richard, and she was diagnosed with a terminal illness and decided to be a bit of a queen pin, dealing with her enemies in the limited time she had left. This included being the person involved in trying to kill Foggy while Matt was in prison, which resulted in Foggy going into witness protection. This actually plays very close to how Foggy died in Born Again, where at the beginning of episode 8 it's revealed that Vanessa got Bullseye out of prison if he agreed to kill Foggy. Would be cool to see if the witness protection plot plays out in Born Again, the same as it did in the comics, but after this, Vanessa ultimately died of her illness. The Hand did attempt to resurrect her at one point, as they're known to do, but Wilson thinks of her resurrected self as being nothing but a dumb clone, and he snaps her neck. Her first non-comic book appearance was in Spider-Man the Animated Series in the 90s in Seasons 2, Episodes 11 and 12 from 1995, where she was voiced by Caroline Goodall.
Yo, stop, Ms. Kingpin.
I'm warning you. My husband will not tolerate this.
And she was actually not a villain in this show, surprisingly. She doesn't return again until 2015's Daredevil. She appears then next in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse in 2018, voiced by Lake Bell, and she returns in Daredevil Born Again Season 1 as a main character following up from the Netflix show, and will return again in Season 2.
Wait. Richard, come on.
And she returns in Daredevil Born Again Season 1 as a main character following up from the Netflix show, and will return again in Season 2.
I think your best work is still ahead.
You keep sweet talking.
Doris is the wife of Ben Urich and appears in 4 episodes throughout Season 1. First appearing in Episode 3, she's played by Adrienne Lennox, a rather tragic character in the show. She had a medical condition that required her to be a full-time patient at a hospital with Ben, constantly struggling to afford to pay for it. She could tell easily in Ben when he had a story that needed to be told, and she gave him the push to continue with the Fisk story, which unfortunately and ultimately led to Ben's death at the hands of Wilson Fisk. Doris met Karen at Ben's funeral, making sure Karen knew that Ben took care of any financial burden her hospital would require. In the comics, she first appears in Daredevil issue 163 from December 1979. In issue 179, she tried to talk Ben out of continuing the Randolph Cherry story. She returns again in issue 192 in 1983, and we kind of see how much she isn't happy with her and Ben's life, and the two go house hunting. And after this, Doris meets Daredevil for the first time. Unfortunately, the house does not go according to plan. It's actually been a ploy by Fisk to get at Ben Urich. Ben wants to buy the house anyway, even knowing this so that he won't disappoint Doris, but Daredevil tells Doris the truth and she convinces Ben not to. During Born Again, Ben once again becomes a thorn for Kingpin, so in response, Kingpin sends one of his people to kill Doris and make it look like she did it herself. Ben comes home just as it happens and stops it, and she's badly hurt but survives, but this was a clear message to Ben that he needs to stop messing around with the stuff he's got his foot in. Unfortunately though, during Secret Invasion in 2008, Doris does die for real this time, and she never made an appearance outside of 2015's Daredevil, so kind of a tragic character all around.
Can I join him for a few balls?
You wanna ask? Knock yourself out.
Be right back.
John Healy appears in Season 1, Episode 3, played by Alex Morph, and in his one appearance he is an assassin for Wilson Fisk. And when confronted by the Man in the Mask at the end of the episode, John kills himself knowing that Kingpin is going to kill him anyway, knowing he mentioned his name. In the comics, he's got a very limited history. He's called Alvin Healy and known as the villain Tenpin, originally a Captain America villain in the 80s. He first showed up in Captain America issue 317 from February 1986, and he was a bowling-themed villain. Makes sense considering the name. Hence the little Easter egg when he's in a bowling alley in his first Daredevil episode. And he had a pretty limited comic book history after this, only appearing 10 times from 1986 to 2006, so roughly once every 2 years, and he was part of the organization known as Raids, a little group known as Death Throws, where they'd go around various countries causing death and destruction as distractions for heroes such as the Avengers. Outside of Daredevil, he appeared in Murdock in episodes 4, 5, 9, and 10, voiced by Chris Parnell.
The meatloaf! It goes beef, turkey, beef. The turkey is always so dry.
There are a couple of references in episode 3. The first comes from Detective Foster, the fake Russian police officer. The name Detective Foster might be a reference to Bill Foster, aka Goliath, who we mentioned a little bit earlier, since he was married to Claire Temple briefly in the comics. Bill Foster did make some MCU appearances in both Ant-Man and the Wasp and What If. Some people might argue that this was an actual character and should get a full entry, but I'm not so sure. But Ben Urich meets with a crime family member named Silvio. And in the comics, the Spider-Man villain Silvermane is called Silvio Manfredi. Now, some might argue that this is the same person, but I think Silvio is a common enough name that without an actual second name drop in the episode, I'm not really sure if this counts as the same guy. This could possibly be a problem that maybe Sony had the rights to Silvio Manfredi or Silvermane, and so Daredevil coming out before Spider-Man had been in even Civil War yet, it could be possible that they wanted this to technically be that character, but Sony had the rights so they couldn't use it. But I don't know, without a second name, I'm not convinced that this is actually Silvermane. I think it's just supposed to be a little bit more than an Easter egg. Thought I'd mention it anyway because places like the Daredevil wiki list him as being a similar character to Silvermane. Then there are photos on the wall in Ben Urich's office from the Incredible Hulk that make reference to both Hulk and the Abomination. Both these photos continue to make appearances in the show for the duration of the series.
And it's not just the crack part that's broken. The crack makes the whole thing fragile like a bird egg. I gotta make you a new one.
Melvin Potter only has 7 appearances throughout the entire Daredevil show, spread throughout all 3 seasons, but he's actually fairly important to the whole thing. Played by Matt Gerald, he first appears in Season 1, Episode 8, but is mentioned as early as Episode 4. And he's the person designing Fisk's armoured suits because Fisk is threatening somebody he deeply cares about. And once Matt is able to get him out from under Fisk, Melvin becomes the guy who's putting together and creating all of Matt's suits and weapons in the show. In Season 2, he also helps get Elektra fitted with her new suit, but unfortunately in Season 3, with Matt having been gone for a while, Fisk once again gets a foothold on Melvin's life, forcing him to create the Daredevil costume that Bullseye wears. His last appearance on the show is being arrested. In the comics, Melvin is also a pretty long-time antagonist of Daredevil, as well as later ally, that goes by the name The Gladiator. He first appears in Daredevil issue 18 from May 1966, and in this he was a costume designer who wanted to defeat costumed heroes in battle. We already talked about this issue a bit earlier, but in issue 22 of Daredevil from late 1966, Masked Marauder teams up with Melvin Potter, aka the Gladiator, and they create a supervillain android called the Tri-Man to defeat Daredevil. And following this, they kidnap Karen and Foggy. So after this, Daredevil ends up fighting Gladiator in a Gladiator-style pit, beating him, and then a line is unleashed on both of them. And in a bit of an uncharacteristic move from a 1960s Marvel villain, Gladiator admits that Daredevil saved his life and then refuses to fight him. Gladiator returns as part of the Emissaries of Evil in 1967, along with Electro, Stiltman, Leapfrog, and Matador. So obviously this little "I won't fight a man who saved my life" thing doesn't last super long. He returns again in September 1981 for Daredevil issue 174, where he's a bit of an ally. Matt is defending Melvin in court, and Elektra breaks him out of his police convoy so that he will fight the hand with her. So Melvin ends up teaming up with Elektra to fight assassins, which is pretty cool. Melvin has a role to play in Born Again, like most Daredevil characters, returning and contacting Ben Urich. And just like in Season 3 of the Netflix series, Fisk has threatened Betsy, the one Melvin cares about, unless Melvin makes a Daredevil costume for him. Matt goes to Melvin and tells him to make the costume and that Matt will keep him safe, and Melvin is happy to hear that Daredevil's back. In the early 2000s, Gladiator is part of a group of Daredevil and Spider-Man villains called the Gang of Four, with the Owl, Stiltman, and Copperhead. After this, Melvin ends up in and out of prison a lot. He does eventually go insane in the comics though, hearing voices and wanting to keep the people responsible for the death of his family, and he's never appeared outside of Netflix's Daredevil.
But maybe it's time you came home.
I'm right here when you need me.
Now, Anna Nelson is an interesting one, because in the show she's played by Deirdre O'Connell, and while she's mentioned as early as Season 1 Episode 4, she doesn't appear until Season 3 Episode 2, and shows up 2 more times after that. And she is Foggy's mother and is loving of her son. But what makes her interesting is that Foggy's birth mother had a different name in the comics and left him when he was very young. But his stepmother, who came along later on in his life and gave him the love and support he never had from his biological mother, was actually called Anna Nelson. So they did a bit of a switch around here, as show Anna is Foggy's biological mother. She does get a mention in Daredevil Born Again, but that's all she gets outside of Daredevil. In episode 4, there are references to both Thor and Iron Man, huge MCU heroes. The Iron Man references continue for the remainder of the show, where Tony Stark, Stark Tower, and Stark Industries get mentioned quite often. There's also a 10 rings tattoo on Vladimir's body in this episode, which is a clear reference to the Mandarin, a big Iron Man villain in the comics, and someone who's heavily important in Iron Man 3 and the short All Hail the King, and then makes his debut in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, and also What If and Marvel Zombies.
Wilson.
Fisk?
I like this part of the video because we're on a lot of characters that have so little in the comics and so little in the show that we're kind of just speed running through them and picking up kind of a quick pace. So this is fun. But Marlene Vestaine is the name of Wilson Fisk's mother in the show, appearing in 3 episodes. She's first mentioned in episode 4 and then appears in episode 8. And she is the reason that Ben Urich is killed by Wilson Fisk when he goes to visit her. In the comics, there is very little of her, which you're going to learn is kind of the same thing for a lot of characters from this point on. Wilson Fisk's life remains a pretty huge secret throughout a lot of the comics, so she's simply called Mrs. Fisk, appearing in Daredevil issue 15 in 2001, which is when we finally get a look into Fisk's childhood. And she was mentioned in both 2024's Echo and 2025's Daredevil Born Again.
You know how proud of you I am, Foggy? You're a big deal.
Next up is Foggy's father, Edward Nelson, who is also first mentioned in episode 5 of season 1, but doesn't appear until season 3, episode 2, appearing 2 more times that season, and he's played by Michael Mulhern. Another character with not a whole lot to do in the comics, he first appears in Daredevil issue 108 from November 1973, and when Foggy's mother and his wife left him, he married Anna, who took on the Nelson name.
This city, it's everything. It's right there. All you gotta do is put your mind to it and make it happen.
William or Bill Fisk is played by Dominic Lombardozzi. He's mentioned in season 1 episode 5, but he makes his first and only appearance in season 1 episode 8. Kind of an asshole to his son Wilson, Bill was not somebody that you wanted as a father. In the comics, just like Wilson's mother, he's referred to as Mr. Fisk and appears in Daredevil issue 15 from 2001, where Wilson's home life is not great. Outside of this, he appears in Spider-Man the Animated Series, where he's called Mr. Moriarty, in Season 3, Episode 7, where he's voiced by someone I could not find.
Nobody believed me, but I knew the famous Kingpin was really my boy Willie.
Sorry about that. His voice is also heard in 2024's Echo, and he gets a mention in Daredevil Born Again.
Batch of chemicals straight off the periodic tables and...
Next up, we have Stick, who is a character who was added late to the Daredevil mythos, almost 20 years after Daredevil's original debut. In the show, he makes his first appearance in Season 1, Episode 7, played by Scott Glenn. He goes on to appear in only 5 episodes throughout the show, between the first and second season. We learn about his long-time war between the chest and the hand, and that he found Matt so that he could train him to fight in his war. Before the two parted ways, when he returns to Matt's present-day life, Stick wants Matt to join him in the war once again. When he returns in Season 2, we would discover that he's now working with Elektra, and this forces Matt to team up with both of them to get to the bottom of what's going on in New York, all of which gets followed up on in Defenders. He first appears in Daredevil issue 176 from July 1981, where it's revealed that he was the person who helped train Matt and give him all of his skills. It's also revealed a bit later on that he also helped train Elektra, but had to dismiss her due to her being unable to get over the death of her father. In this issue, Stick comes back into Matt's present day after Matt has suffered a pretty hard defeat. With Stick back in Matt's life, Matt begins training with him, and Stick trains him hard, but doing so, Matt begins to get back to full strength. Stick ended up relocating to New York to watch over Daredevil and Matt, and Stick was also a part of the chase in the comics and constantly pushing their war against the Hand. We talked about this a little bit earlier with Foggy. Both Foggy and Stick had been killed and then resurrected by the Hand, and once the person who resurrected them was killed, Stick returned to death and to the Beast's realm, just like Foggy. Outside of Daredevil, Stick was in Spider-Man the Animated Series in Season 3, Episode 6, where he was only in flashbacks and never spoke.
Stick was my mentor. He helped me to live up to the nickname that
And then he showed up in live action in Elektra's 2005 film, played by Terrence Stamp.
But you do not know the way.
Teach me then.
That's my point. I can't teach you.
As her trainer in that film. After 2015's Daredevil, he returns in a main role in The Defenders, where he is killed. Next up is Joseph Pike, played by Kevin McCormack, and he appears in one episode, that episode being Season 1, Episode 7, where he attacks Karen and Foggy and helps fight them off. In the comics, he's a very low-level Kingpin henchman called Wall-Eyed, who appears in Daredevil issue 165 from 1980, where he played a Turk-like role, where in his few appearances, he's interrogated by various characters to find the location of someone else, and he never appears in anything outside of Netflix's Daredevil.
I can take care of myself.
Next up is Stuart Schmidt, who also appeared just in episode 7, where he was also a Kingpin thug attacking Karen and Foggy. And in the comics, he's called Stymie and appears right around the same time as Wall-Eyed in Daredevil issue 164 from February 1980. In these few issues, he's revealed to have been at school with Matt Murdock, part of the Fixers crew, where Daredevil first shows up. You can tell the Netflix writers really had a lot of love for this era of characters, and just like Wall-Eyed, he doesn't appear in anything after Daredevil.
Will he be ready when the doors open?
Next up is Stone, who's played by Jason Finney, and makes a very brief cameo appearance at the end of episode 7 as a member of the Chase that Stick works with. In the comics, this is also who he is, first appearing in Daredevil issue 187 from June 1982 as the pupil of Stick because Stick was in charge of the Chase. And he fought the Hand along with Stick and characters like Daredevil and Black Widow too. When the Hand tries to resurrect Elektra after her death at the hands of Bullseye, Stone helps Daredevil fight them and is part of the reason why Elektra is resurrected. It was after this battle that Stone was believed to have died. But way later on, it was revealed that he was actually still alive and still fighting the Hand. Outside of Netflix's Daredevil, Stone appears in 2005's Elektra film, played by Bob Sapp, and except here, he's actually a member of the Hand. In episode 7, there is a reference to Asano Robotics, which is a reference to Yoshida Asano, aka Samurai Steel, who in the comics is an Iron Man villain in the 90s, and there's also a reference to this in Season 2, Episode 5.
Running for office. I'll leave that to people like you, Senator.
It's a good answer.
Randolph Cherry was a very minor character in the Netflix show who had a slightly deeper comics history. First being mentioned in Season 1, Episode 9, he appeared in Episode 10, and then also in Episode 13, the season finale. In the show, he's played by Jonathan Walker and was a senator for New York who had close ties to Wilson Fisk, aiming to help rebuild the city together. In the season final, he's arrested by the FBI when everything about Fisk is exposed. In the comics, he's also a politician, a corrupt one tied to Wilson Fisk, and in his first issue in Daredevil 177, Ben Urich was writing a piece on him and how his election run was tied to criminal groups in the city. Cherry's very first scene in the comic is with Wilson Fisk, and it's made clear that Kingpin's completely in control. With Ben Urich still chasing the story, Cherry personally threatens and roughs up Ben until Daredevil shows up. Following this, Cherry and Kingpin begin suing the Daily Bugle for the piece they're writing on him, but the Bugle has approached Nelson and Murdock to represent them. So Foggy ends up recruiting Power Man and Iron Fist to help them stay clear of Fisk and his goons, which leads Luke Cage and Danny Rand to keep an eye on Cherry. A bit later, after another run-in with Elektra, Ben Urich stops chasing the story, and the Daily Bugle are forced to drop it, leaving Cherry pretty easily able to run in his election, and Cherry is a shoo-in to win. Unfortunately though for Randolph, Daredevil has just found out where Fisk's wife Vanessa is, and he's going to leverage her to make Fisk give Daredevil Cherry. And as soon as he wins, Fisk forces Cherry to withdraw from being mayor. Randolph stays gone from comics after this brief stint until he appears in one issue of Untold Tales of Spider-Man in 1995, and here he's just a councilman once again, and is attacked by the creature known as Batwing, which leads Spider-Man to track Cherry down and question him. Spider-Man then uses Cherry as bait to drive Batwing, and Cherry ends up capturing Batwing and intends on killing him, as well as offering Spider-Man a reward for helping. But Peter can't allow this and frees Batwing. And that's all she wrote on Randolph Cherry, a character who has never appeared outside of the comics that anything that wasn't Netflix's Daredevil.
Thank God your mother wasn't alive for this.
Next up, we have Paxton Page, first mentioned in Season 1, Episode 9, but not appearing until Season 3, Episode 10. He's played by Lee Tergson, and while in the show he was a pretty standard human, in the comics he's a very brief but very weird history. Only appearing twice in Daredevil issues 56 and 57 in mid-1969, he's a scientist who goes insane and becomes a supervillain called Death's Head, that wants to kill Daredevil. During Death's Head's fight with Daredevil, Karen gets put in harm's way, and Death's Head sacrifices himself to save her. The 1960s, man. They are weird. The first Captain America reference in the show comes in episode 9 as well. You know, big major MCU hero, maybe you've heard of him. There is also a reference to a Richmond character in episode 9 that is possibly a reference to Kyle Richmond, aka Nighthawk, who is both a Defender and Avenger in the comic, and gets some MCU mentions in All Hail the King and WHIH Newsfront.
Hello, Matthew.
One of the more well-known Daredevil characters that is almost always tied to Matt is Elektra Natchios. Played by Elodie Young, she's first mentioned in Season 1, Episode 10 as a Greek girl Matt knows while he's at college with Foggy. She first shows up properly at the very end of Season 2, Episode 4, having broken into Matt's apartment, and Episode 5 we get flashbacks to their first nights together, and how she helped Matt get some revenge for what happened to his father. When she returns to Matt's life, she's having tangles with the Yakuza and has been working with Stick to fight the Hand. She unfortunately dies in the final episode of the season and is shown to be resurrected by the Hand. She does come back for a short bit following this, but by the time of Daredevil Season 3, she is once again presumed dead. She only appears in 10 of the 39 episodes, but her impact on Matt as a character is huge. So she first shows up in October of 1980 in Daredevil issue 168. And in this issue, she sees Daredevil from a distance and instantly recognizes him, not wanting him to mess up a mission she's on. That mission being to kidnap a man named Ulrich Wallenquist for a bounty. She attacks Daredevil, knocking out Ulrich that he was talking to, and Daredevil instantly recognizes Elektra's voice. It's during this issue that we flash back to when Matt was 19 in college with Foggy, and we get the first time him and Elektra met. She's a new student who just joined the college, and her father are kidnapped as part of a terrorist plot on the college, which leads to her father getting killed. Shortly after this, Elektra goes to Stick and begins her training, but she's dismissed when to Stick it's clear that she can't get over her father's death. After this, Elektra becomes a weapon for the Hand, and in issue 174 from September 1981, Elektra sees the order to assassinate Matt Murdock, so she returns to New York and ends up teaming up with an unlikely ally called Gladiator to fend off attacks from Hand assassins to protect Matt. This leads to Elektra being the next person ordered to be assassinated, and in issue 177, Kingpin finds out about her and decides he wants to recruit her as his new assassin, and in the following issue, Kingpin finally recruits Elektra for real. Elektra is sent after people who are being trouble for Fisk, and in issue 179 she kills an informant for Ben Urich who is leaking information to the reporter. She then threatens Ben and tells him he'll let Randolph be elected or he'll die. Matt finds out about this from Ben and he's forced to go after Elektra, which forces the two into a fight, and because Matt doesn't want to fight and is holding back, Elektra beats him easily. With Elektra having successfully scared off Ben and ensuring that the Daily Bugle drops its story on Cherry, Fisk makes Elektra his top assassin. Unfortunately though, due to forces outside of all of their control, Cherry is forced to not become mayor, and in the moment of backlash, Fisk tells Elektra to kill Foggy Nelson. In the following issue, which is the big one, the one we're talking about a lot today, Elektra kidnaps Foggy, planning on killing him, but when she realizes his connection to Matt, she just can't do it, which leaves her open for Bullseye, Fisk's last assassin who just escaped from prison so that he can take out the person who replaced him, and he does just that and kills her. Elektra stumbles her way to Matt's apartment and dies in his arms. Around Daredevil issue 190, just 9 issues later, the Hand have taken Elektra's body and are trying to resurrect her just like what happens in Daredevil Season 2 and The Defenders. It works after an interception from the Chased's stone, but unlike the show, Elektra doesn't have that crazy era in the comics. During the Fall from Grace arc in the 90s that we've talked about a little bit today, Elektra is fully part of the Chased and fighting with them. Elektra gets her own miniseries in 2004 and 2005 called Elektra the Hand, and in this Elektra learns about the origins of the Hand, resurrection, and the cycle surrounding it all. Elektra was part of a lot of different Marvel teams after this, like Heroes for Hire, the Thunderbolts. Yep, that one. Even S.H.I.E.L.D. at one point, and having tangles with the Hand all throughout. In 2020, she returns in Daredevil issue 12, where she helps Matt and wants him to train with her, and this continues into the next issues. And as of current Marvel Comics, she's Daredevil along with Matt. Outside of the comics, there's a character in 2003's Spider-Man the New Animated Series called Shikata that is based on Elektra.
Decides how to take down an opponent but me.
She obviously appears in both 2003's Daredevil.
She gave it to me right before she died.
And 2005's Elektra, played by Jennifer Garner. And she then returns playing this same version in 2024's Deadpool and Wolverine. And outside of Daredevil Season 2, she was one of the main antagonists in The Defenders after being resurrected at the end of Daredevil Season 2, where she's currently presumed to have died. And unless they bring her back and Born Again, she's dead in the MCU, which kind of sucks. But she did also receive a mention in Iron Fist, which was pretty cool. There's a Roxxon mention in Season 1, Episode 10, and these mentions continue into Season 2. Roxxon is a company in the comics, but is mentioned all the time in the MCU. Hugh Jones is also a comics character and is the person in charge of Roxxon, and he shows up in Agent Carter Season 2. And in the MCU, they are very responsible for the characters of Cloak and Dagger getting their powers.
Melvin told me about the devil of Hell's Kitchen. He thought you were a hero.
So despite Betsy being mentioned as early as Season 1, Episode 11, and being mentioned again throughout Season 2, she doesn't actually show up until Season 3, Episode 7, being played by Karina Cassiano in her only appearance. In the show, she is Melvin's parole officer, and Fisk threatens her unless Melvin makes his suits for him. Throughout Season 1, Matt ensures that Fisk can't threaten her, but this doesn't continue long, as in Season 3, she's once again threatened unless Melvin makes a Daredevil suit for Benjamin Poindexter, aka Bullseye. In the comics, she's a social worker and therapist instead of a parole officer, and Melvin cares about her deeply when she first appears in Daredevil issue 166 from June 1980. In Born Again in the comics, just like the series, her life is under threat unless Melvin agrees to make a replica Daredevil outfit for Fisk. She defended Melvin a lot in her very brief comic appearances. She even married Melvin at one point, but it didn't last long, as by the later years for the characters, they were divorced. In Season 1, Episode 11, Penelope Page is mentioned, who is Karen's mother. She's never seen in the show because she died before any of Karen's scenes, even in the flashbacks, but in the comics, she was alive. There's a Cybertech reference in Season 1, Episode 11, and these references continue for the remainder of the show. Cybertech were pretty important in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 1, both in the comics and in the MCU they have ties to the character of Deathlock, which Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. also delves into with both John Garrett and Mike Peterson. Caxton Industries is mentioned in Season 1, Episode 13, and a couple of times in Season 3, which alludes to Carl Caxton, and he was a character in the comics tied to Daredevil and also tied to the villain Stiltman. Irving Forbush, aka Forbush Man, is referenced in Season 1, Episode 13, and in the comics he's a bit of a goofy spin-off villain. Also in Episode 13, inside Melvin Potter's workshop, there's a reference to Stiltman, a Daredevil villain that we've mentioned a few times today. There's also a reference again in Season 2. And the final reference of Season 1 is Wygo Industries, which refers to Mr. Zhao, who is an Iron Fist character in the 2000s, and that's Daredevil Season 1. That was a lot. That was a lot, and we still have 2 more seasons to do. But thankfully, or not thankfully, I don't know how much you're enjoying or not enjoying this video, but the most Daredevil comic book characters are in the first season. There are big characters in Season 2, like, we've got the Punisher in Season 2 and Bullseye in Season 3, who are like the 2 biggest characters we still have on this list, but there are not nearly as many characters showing up from the comics in the next 2 seasons that haven't already been in Season 1. So we should be finished pretty soon. I should get you out of here before, but yeah, it's been intense so far, right?
Look around, man. This city, it stinks. It's a sewer. It stinks and it smells like shit, and I can't get the stink out of my nose.
So Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, is only in 1 season of the Netflix series, but he makes an insane impact in that 1 season. Played by John Bernthal, he shows up in Season 2, Episode 1, and sticks around for 12 of the 13 episodes. First showing up as a man going to war with the criminal elements of New York due to the murder of his wife and 2 children, he starts targeting the Irish and biker gangs. But when his war begins to kill a lot of people, Daredevil becomes involved, which puts the 2 in each other's crosshairs. Frank captures Matt and keeps him hostage on a rooftop while morality is thrown around, all leading to Matt being part responsible for Frank being arrested and going on trial, thinking his war finished. During his trial, he begins realizing there's more to this than he thought, with a bit of conspiracy at play involving elements from inside the US government and military, and Wilson Fisk ends up helping him escape prison, leading to Frank continuing to chase down people involved in his family's murder, and when he finally believes he's reached the end, he helps Daredevil fight the Hand in the final episode of Season 2. In the comics, he first appears in the pages of Spider-Man in Amazing Spider-Man issue 129 in October of 1973, where he remains for a lot of his early appearances. His comic origin is very similar to the Netflix series, where Frank is an ex-Marine who witnessed both his wife and kids die due to gang violence, but also due to a bit of conspiracy, but a slightly different one than the shows. In late 1981, Punisher once again ends up in Spider-Man's line of sight, and here we see Frank's morality when he thinks if innocents get hurt, then that's just tough luck. During the fight, Frank refuses to kill Spider-Man, knowing he's not evil, but considering the web-slinger as weak, soft, and stupid. But he shoots him anyway, to Spider-Man's surprise. Frank keeps investigating his current plot and ends up stumbling onto Dr. Octopus, and Otto almost kills Frank and escapes Spider-Man by forcing Spider-Man to choose to save Frank over capturing Octopus. Frank eventually wakes up and, sick of Spider-Man's meddling, wants to kill him, but before he can, he's caught by the police. But then Frank tells him that he doesn't shoot police because they're on the same side, so he allows himself to be arrested and taken to prison. Starting from Daredevil issue 181, Frank begins being a character in the Daredevil comics, first appearing in prison while Bullseye is there, where he tells Bullseye about Elektra being Fisk's new assassin to get him to break out. While in prison, Frank keeps killing people, until a government agent sick of how things like crime are being handled agrees to free Frank if he goes after drugs in New York. Frank successfully stops the drug shipment, but among the people he kills, he finds out that the drug dealers use children, which makes Frank even angrier and makes him commit to this new war completely. Around the same time, Daredevil has also become intertwined in the current drug epidemic, which makes Matt and Frank's paths cross, leading to their first ever meeting. One thing Frank does after his fight with Daredevil that he didn't do with Spider-Man is actually ask Daredevil to be allies and to team up against the criminals. But Daredevil with his moral code immediately says no, and that Frank's a murderer and he'll never work with him. Frank almost kills a junkie while wanting information, but Matt is able to save the junkie's life. One thing that is great about Frank's first appearance is that at the end of this issue, Frank hears Matt's voice on the radio, and Frank immediately recognizes it as Daredevil. Like, this is really cool. The two characters continue sparring for another issue, and the iconic one where Matt points Frank's gun at him. And while Frank's distracted, a child shoots Frank and is ready to kill him, but Daredevil talks the kid out of it, leading to Frank being arrested once again. Back in prison, Frank starts wanting to take down the Kingpin at all costs, considering Fisk as a huge part of the reason why New York City has gotten so bad, and that he's allowing a lot of the bad things going on. So when he escapes in a comic we've talked about today, he goes after Fisk and takes Vanessa prisoner. And Wilson Fisk beats him down pretty bad, but not considering Frank as someone worth killing, so he leaves him alone. And Frank goes back to prison again shortly after this. But after getting out of prison again, Frank teams up with the character of Micro, a well-known character from the Punisher show, who looks very similar to a certain Fantastic Four character. I don't know, just a thing I'm thinking of. Rather than being locked up again, Frank actually broke into prison at one point to deal with cults that are ravaging the streets of New York. Crazy guy. He teamed up with Spider-Man eventually, tangled with other iconic villains like Jigsaw, fought Bullseye heavily at one point, and during Civil War he got pretty not okay with what the government was doing with certain super criminals and joined Captain America's side of the Civil War, which caused Steve to beat him, saying he doesn't want a guy like this on his side. When he demands Frank fights back, Frank simply says, "Not against you," because Captain America is a war hero to Frank Castle. Frank then gets locked up again, but in a S.H.I.E.L.D. facility this time, and during Secret Invasion he escapes. Once Norman Osborn becomes the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. after Secret Invasion, Frank tries to kill him, but fails. Way later in 2019, in issue 3 of Daredevil, Frank actually helps stitch Matt up and save him after Matt is shot and injured by Cole North. And also later that year, Mayor Fisk forms a new Thunderbolts led by Baron Zemo and sends them after Frank until Black Widow, Night Thrasher, and Moon Knight come to his aid, which gives us probably one of the more well-known comic panels between Frank and Moon Knight. Now, Frank's history is deep and huge, and I don't want to spend half an hour talking about everything he's done in the comics, because in the grand scheme of Daredevil, he's got a much bigger and wider history than that. And I feel like, this video was already long enough. There's no point going into all the little things about Frank Castle and the Punisher. So if you want to see a deeper video on Frank Castle's history, let me know you want to see the Punisher Netflix show version of this video, and I'll definitely delve way more into him there. But also, we touched on a lot of things. Like, I didn't go over the part where he chains Matt to the rooftop again, because we already talked about that when talking about Daredevil. So yeah. But outside of the comics, Frank first appears in 1989's The Punisher film, played by Dolph Lundgren.
The guilty will be punished.
And here he's an ex-police detective instead of military. He's actually the earliest character on this list to have had his own theatrical solo film, which is pretty cool. And after this, he appears in Spider-Man the Animated Series, voiced by John Beck.
Ain't gonna walk tonight, or ever again. You understand?
Where he appears in 5 episodes spread throughout seasons 2, 4, and 5. In the same continuity, he also has a lot of Easter eggs in X-Men the Animated Series, like a robot that Jean Grey fights, and being on the cover of a fictional video game called Assassin. He next shows up again in theatrical capacity in his own film in 2004 as The Punisher, played by Thomas Jane. Thomas Jane returned to the role in 2012 with a fan-made short film called The Punisher: Dirty Laundry that uses the score from The Dark Knight, which shows how fan-made it is. He's back in a film again in 2008 called The Punisher Warzone, played by Ray Stevenson this time. Rest in peace. And Ray Stevenson also voices the character in one episode of Marvel's Superhero Squad show, which was also in 2008.
The infection called crime, a sickness that sneaks in through the cracks, the way that Brussels sprouts sneak onto a plate of delicious macaroni and cheese.
He's had a bunch of animated appearances around this time, appearing in 2 Marvel anime films called Iron Man Rise of Technovore in 2013, voiced by Norman Reedus.
Must be nice to have money.
Right, Stark?
Well, it certainly doesn't hurt.
And in Avengers Confidential, Black Widow and Punisher in 2014, voiced by Brian Bloom. His Japanese voice actor in these was Tisho Genda, and he was in an episode of Season 1 of Avengers Assemble in 2013 as well. And outside of Daredevil Season 2 in 2016, he had his own Netflix show as a continuation of his story there in 2017's The Punisher, where he dealt with a lot of Punisher-related characters and villains, before the show was cancelled in 2019 after 2 seasons, unfortunately. He obviously returned in Daredevil Born Again earlier on this year, and he will probably return again in Season 2, but if he doesn't, we have our own Punisher special coming next year, as well as his appearance in Spider-Man Brand New Day, which is really exciting. Can't wait to see that stuff.
I got no idea.
Well, what do you know?
I know he's a sociopath, that's what.
Grotto is a pretty minor character in the series, only appearing in 3 episodes at the beginning of Season 2 and played by Michaela Burnett. He works with the Hell's Kitchen Irish, which makes him a target for Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, and he ends up running to Nelson and Murdock and the police for help, but is grabbed by Frank and Matt and is given the choice of killing Frank or Grotto, and when Matt can't choose, Grotto is killed by Frank himself. In Daredevil issue 180, and the aftermath of Matt's recent loss to Elektra, he finds Grotto along with Turk and makes sure they're both done being criminals for a bit. 2 issues later, Grotto and Turk both break out of the same prison that Frank Castle is in, and a bit later on, Grotto along with Turk is in Josie's when Daredevil shows up along with Wolverine and kicks the shit into both of them. In issue 200, they once again both get beaten up by Daredevil as he comes looking for Bullseye. I'm repeating myself a lot today, aren't I? Later on in the comics, Grotto ratted out Turk to Daredevil, and once he did, Turk came back and killed Grotto in Infinity Countdown from 2018, and Grotto never appears outside of Daredevil. In early Season 2, Frank has his own little cute puppy called Max, and he's a comic book character, so he's on this list. First appearing in The Punisher issue 54 from 1991, and I don't know what to say about him. You know, Frank has him for like 5 issues in the 90s, and that's kind of it.
Cheers. He's all right, yeah?
Finn Cooley is played by Tony Curran and is first mentioned in Season 2, Episode 1 as one of the leaders of the Irish in Hell's Kitchen, until he shows up in Episode 4, captures Frank, tortures him, and then is promptly killed by Frank. In the comics, he first shows up in Punisher issue 7 from 2004 and only lives a handful of issues until issue 12 at the end of that year. In the comics, he's a member of the IRA, because in Marvel and DC, every American media piece out there, when you need an Irish villain, you just say that they're in the IRA. Do you guys think we're all in the IRA or something? I don't know. But he tries to blow up Frank, his bomb goes off too early, and he dies instead. A lot of Daredevil Season 2 episodes in the early half of the season are very much based on the Punisher comics from around this time, so Finn's kind of part of that. And that's a good jumping off point for the next character.
Lost our edge. Just enough for a piece of garbage like Wilson Fisk to steal what was rightfully ours.
Who is Nesbitt, played by Andy Murray, and he only appears in episode 1 of season 2 and is the current leader of the Kitchen Irish until he's also killed by Frank, and here's the beginning of that episode. In the comics, he's present around the same time as Finn, except for a lot less amount of time, only 1 issue. The Punisher issue 10 from August 2004 where he lives and then he dies as well, where he's an elderly man who is one of the first leaders of the Kitchen Irish, and just like Finn, he dies to a bomb.
So, what do you want to tell me?
He's gonna tell you that Wilson Fisk has had people murdered.
Next up, we have a character we briefly mentioned earlier, Blake Tower, played by Stephen Ryder, and he first appears in Season 2, Episode 2, and is seen in 14 episodes of the show throughout the 2nd and 3rd seasons. He first shows up offering a protection deal to Grotto, then later on tries to help catch the Punisher, and then in Season 3, he's the person brought on to help Ray Nadeem after he goes rogue from Fisk. In the comics, he first properly appears in Daredevil issue 126 from July 1975, as a person running against Foggy for DA, and Blake ultimately won. Throughout his court days, he tangled with characters like Jennifer Walters, aka She-Hulk, James Buchanan Barnes, aka the Winter Soldier, Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, a lot of the big hits. Outside of Daredevil, he appears in the wider Marvel Netflix corner, appearing in an episode in both seasons of Luke Cage, and being mentioned in Jessica Jones Seasons 2 and 3 and The Defenders. There are 2 references in episode 2. The first one is of Oscar Clemens, who in the comics is a police officer in the Punisher comics. At this point, he has already appeared in the MCU and was killed in Jessica Jones Season 1. And the other reference is of Killdozer, who is an Iron Man villain from the 90s. In episode 3, we get a Luke Cage reference, Luke obviously being a huge character in the comics, and in the MCU in the Defenders corner of the Netflix universe. Lord Hirochi in the comics just appears as Hirochi in Daredevil Season 2. Played by Ron Nakahara, he is first mentioned in Season 2, Episode 4, but appears in 5 episodes from Episode 5 throughout the back half of the season. He's a member of the hand that Stick, Elektra, and later Daredevil are trapping, and he cruelly tortures Stick until Stick is able to get the upper hand and kills him brutally. In the comics, Lord Hiroshi only appears 5 times, with his first appearance being in Daredevil issue 111 from late 2008, where he was a leader of the specific faction of the Hand. He tried to plot the Hand reforming into one faction by killing many other people, but failed, and he eventually ran afoul of Kingpin and was killed by him only 1 year after his first appearance in mid-2009. And starting in episode 4 throughout the rest of the season, we begin getting references to Frank Castle's wife and 2 children, Maria Castle, Lisa Castle, and Frank Jr. Castle. They make appearances throughout the Punisher show in the MCU and are main staples of Frank's character in the comics as well. Next up, we have a big Jessica Jones show character, Jerry Hogarth, played by Carrie-Anne Moss, who is first mentioned in Daredevil Season 2 Episode 5, but makes an appearance in the Season 2 finale, recruiting Foggy Nelson into her firm. In the comics, she is a very different character, a man named Jaren Hogarth, who was originally an Iron Fist character in Iron Fist issue 6 from May 1976, a lawyer and businessman who is heavily tied to Rand and Meacham's companies. Jaren was very heavily tied to Heroes for Hire and the characters of Danny Rand and Luke Cage for a lot of his comic book history, and later on also took the cases to do with the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. During Civil War, he defended Danny Rand during Iron Man's attempt to get all heroes to register for the Superhero Registration Act, and after this he remained heavily tied to the Iron Fist corner of the Marvel Universe. Outside of the comics, Jaren was reinvented as Jerry for Jessica Jones, being a main character throughout all 3 seasons and being diagnosed with a terminal illness toward the end of that show. She doesn't die on screen, but with the amount of time in universe since Jessica Jones Season 3 took place, I think it's probably a fair bet to say that she's not around in the Marvel Universe anymore. She also had appearances in Iron Fist Season 1 as an old friend of the Rand family, which is a cool connection to the Iron Fist comics, and also in the Defenders as well. She received one final mention at the beginning of Daredevil Born Again when her firm is mentioned. Hugo Nachos is the father of Elektra and is mentioned in Season 2 Episode 5, but appears way in the background during flashbacks of Season 2 Episode 12, played by an uncredited actor. Sorry. Just like his daughter, Hugo's first appearance was in Daredevil issue 168 from October 1980. And in this issue, he appears in flashbacks introducing Elektra to the same college that Matt and Foggy ran. He also dies in this issue. He's taken captive and held hostage by armed terrorists who come to the college and is killed by accident. He pops up a handful of times throughout Marvel's history after this, but almost always during flashbacks or retelling of origins. Like in the Man Without Fear miniseries that delves into Matt Murdock's past and shows a retelling of his origin with Elektra, and he meant a lot to Elektra. And when she went to train with Stick after his death, Stick dismissed her for having too much emotions about her father. This is kind of similar to Stick in the Netflix show, where he dismisses Matt once Matt becomes too attached to Stick as a person. He appears twice outside of the comics, and that's in the Daredevil film in 2003, being played by Eric Avari, where he also dies, and he is in the Elektra film in 2005, but here he's played by Kurt Max Runt, despite this being one continuity. Jessica Jones is first mentioned in Season 2 Episode 5, also a very well-known MCU character, and also in the comics. And Nick Manolis is mentioned in this episode, who is a police officer in the Daredevil comics who dies during Daredevil Born Again.
I would say Frank Castle is a man who would gladly give his life to keep others safe.
Next up is Ray Schoonover, also called the Blacksmith. First mentioned in Season 2 Episode 7, he appears in Episodes 8 and 12, played by Clancy Brown. First talking about how good of a man Frank Castle is when he's put on trial, and then being revealed to have been a part of the conspiracy involving Frank's family's deaths. Frank kills him when he gets his hands on him. In the comics, the Blacksmith is actually a character called Winslow Smith. He's not actually a Punisher character at all, appearing once in Thing issue 29 from July 1985 as a wrestler who fought against Thing and Dynamite Dunphy, and that's literally it. These Daredevil writers love the deep cuts, but the actual character of Ray Schoonover is a Punisher character who appeared very briefly in Punisher War Journal issues 4 and 5 from late 1988, where he was also the commanding officer of Frank's unit, like he is in Daredevil and the Punisher. He appears once again in The Punisher Season 1 in flashback capacity, showing the operation that went wrong that was discussed during Frank's trial in Daredevil Season 2.
She wants to come see you.
She can't. She must stay where she's safe for the time being.
Of course.
Next up, we have Benjamin Big Ben Donovan, who is Fisk's lawyer and appears in 6 episodes throughout Daredevil Seasons 2 and 3, with the first one being Season 2 Episode 9, played by Danny Johnson. Fisk first contacts him as soon as he's sent to prison after Season 1, and he remains in Fisk's employ when he gets out in Season 3. In the comics, Donovan is a regular Heroes for Hire villain, first appearing in Heroes for Hire issue 14 from July 1973. He doesn't have a lot of appearances, and the ones he does have usually involve him tangling with Luke Cage, the Mob, or more recently, Tombstone, the Spider-Man villain. Outside of the comics, Donovan has showed up in 8 episodes of Luke Cage, which makes that more than in Daredevil, spread throughout Luke Cage's first and second seasons, which really pays homage to the history in Luke Cage comics. He appears in 2 episodes of Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes in 2012, and he was also in Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man earlier on this year. Next up is Christina Nachios, Elektra's mother, who appears in flashback capacity in Season 2, Episode 12, and just like Elektra's father Hugo, she's way in the background. In the comics, she was killed by assassins trying to get at her husband in Elektra Assassin issue 1 from 1996, and she has even less appearances than Hugo does, but she was in the 2005 Elektra film played by Jane Mitsula. Next up is the character of Star, played by Lawrence Mason. He only appears in Season 2, Episode 12, and was a member of the Chase who kidnapped Elektra. Now, he does exist in the comics, but I genuinely had a really hard time finding out any information about his character, so I'm just going to leave him here like that. And in Season 2, Episode 12, we get a reference to Micro David Lieberman when Frank is cleaning out his stuff. He's in the MCU in the Punisher show, as well as getting a reference in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 2 as someone that Skye used to know. In the comics, he's mostly called Microchip and is tied to Frank Castle there as well. And that's all Season 2. See how quicker Season 2 was than Season 1? And Season 3 has even less comic book characters than Season 2. So we're going to be done in no time.
Hello, Karen. It's nice to see you again.
Now on to Season 3, and time for probably the coolest character in the entire show in my opinion, and the last major comic book character from the show, and that is Benjamin Poindexter, aka Bullseye, who was played by Wilson Bethel and was a main character throughout Season 3. First appearing in Season 3, Episode 2 is one of the FBI agents escorting Wilson Fisk from prison to his safe house. He is one of the only ones to survive the Albanian attack on Fisk's convoy. And after this, Fisk becomes increasingly interested in Poindexter's unique skills. He slowly starts manipulating Poindexter's life, killing the woman he cares about and hiding it, all in an attempt to make Bullseye be his perfect soldier. Fisk even makes Bullseye into an equal of Daredevil, sends him after Karen Page, kills Paul Lantham, kills Ray Nadeem, and finally at the end of the season, Matt is able to turn Poindexter against Fisk, and during their final fight, Fisk breaks Poindexter's back. The final scene of the entire show features Poindexter finally becoming the comic book version of Bullseye. He first appears in the comics in Daredevil issue 131 from December 1975. In the comic, he's called Benjamin Poindexter and is immediately a huge thorn in the sides of the Man Without Fear. In Daredevil issue 159, he shows up at the very end with a plan to capture Black Widow, knowing that she's Daredevil's current girl. And in issue 160, that's exactly what he does, sneaking into her apartment, fighting her, and knocking her out so that he can spring a trap for Daredevil. Daredevil successfully tracks Bullseye to Coney Island until Black Widow gets herself free and attacks Bullseye herself. And Bullseye can't handle both of them, and he's unable to shoot Daredevil, which makes his catching pretty easy, and he's arrested once again. Bullseye returns in Daredevil issue 181 from December 1981, and it's so easy to tell how big and important this issue is for so many Daredevil characters, considering it's come up so many times today. Like genuine potential for most iconic or most important Daredevil issue of all time right here with this one. And he's in prison thinking over and over and over again about how many times Daredevil's beaten him. He spends so much of his time training for when he will come face to face with Daredevil again. Still getting headaches from a brain tumor he has, he's approached by a TV presenter to be interviewed on live television. And following this, Frank Castle approaches Bullseye on the prison yard and tells him that Fisk has a new assassin, that assassin being Elektra, which plants that little seed in Bullseye's brain to make him want to break out. Bullseye is then brought onto live television, and in a scene that is very similar to Born Again where he spits his teeth at his guards to escape prison, here he spits a tablet for his headaches back at his guards, allowing him time to escape. So Bullseye finds out about Elektra, and now she's currently searching for Foggy Nelson to kill, and Bullseye does some maths in his head and starts to kind of realize that Matt is Daredevil, and Elektra is killing Matt's best friend. Bullseye even goes to court the following day and watches how Matt and Foggy do a case. He then sits on Foggy for hours, waiting for Elektra to show up. Eventually, Elektra does show up, and Bullseye catches her by surprise and kills her. He follows Elektra as she stumbles to Matt Murdock's apartment, and then she dies beside Matt. And it's when he sees this that Matt Murdock being Daredevil is almost confirmed inside of his twisted head. Bullseye is kind of a sick person, so he goes to the morgue while Matt and Foggy look over Elektra's body, and when Bullseye notices that Matt's heartbeat jumps when he hears Bullseye talk, he realizes that Matt knows who he is. Thus, Matt has to be Daredevil. Bullseye returns to Fisk and tells him that he killed Elektra and that Matt Murdock is Daredevil, and Fisk doesn't believe the second one, but he's not super broken up about the first. Fisk tells Bullseye that he can have his job back, but only if he kills Daredevil. So he goes after Daredevil, and Matt quickly realizes he's the one responsible for Elektra, and that goes crazy, and he tries to kill Bullseye. But Bullseye survives and ends up with a shattered spine, unable to talk, and broken arms and legs. Honestly, if you combine his ending in Daredevil Season 3 with the beginning of Born Again, you kinda get exactly this. In Daredevil issue 196, Kenji Oyama is given what's left of Bullseye by Fisk, and in the sequence that is very much played out in the Netflix series, Kenji wants to use an adamantium process to fix Bullseye into a killer once again. In the following issue, he successfully restores him. When this happens, a psychic link is created between Poindexter and Matt Murdock. Both characters begin being able to sense each other. and Bullseye returns to New York, and in issue 200 in the rematch of the century, him and Daredevil tangle once more. Using his psychic link to Matt, he can tell he's back in New York as well. The two stand face to face and briefly talk about their new link, and then they start fighting. And Daredevil is winning until Bullseye pulls out Elektra's weapons to taunt him. And Bullseye ends up winning a little bit, wounds Daredevil, but he lets him live, because he wants Daredevil to know that every time Bullseye kills someone, it's because Matt never killed him. And this flips a switch in Daredevil's head, and he tries to kill Bullseye again before stopping and thinking about his father, and Bullseye is arrested once more. Now, Bullseye is one of the few Daredevil characters from this era that actually does not have a lot to do in Born Again, so it's cool that the Season 3 writers decided to incorporate him into this. Now, during Daredevil issues in the 280s, Bullseye actually became Daredevil for a bit as kind of a joke, so this was definitely part of the reason why they made Bullseye be Daredevil in Season 3 of the Netflix show. This didn't last long, however, as Matt pretty quickly returned to New York, and to mess with Bullseye, Matt dressed up as Bullseye to confront Poindexter as Daredevil, and so they fought, and Matt won, and Poindexter took off the Daredevil suit and was like, Daredevil, what a joke. We talked about this a lot earlier, but in Daredevil issue 5 from the late 90s, he's pushed by Mysterio into killing Karen Page while she protects the Antichrist baby. And then during Civil War, he became a part of the Thunderbolts. Yep, that one. He helped out a lot during Secret Invasion, so Norman Osborn actually made him Hawkeye for a while, which was kind of really cool. Now, he did die in the comics very recently in March of this year, where Matt had to choose to save either Foggy or Bullseye, and obviously chose Foggy. What's cool is that this comic actually came out the very same month as Daredevil Born Again's first episode, where Bullseye kills Foggy, so that was kind of cool little switcheroo there. Outside of this, he's in Daredevil 2003 in an iconic way with a fellow Irishman, Colin Farrell, playing him. Bullseye as a character does appear in 2013's Avengers Assemble, but it is Clint Barton playing him. He's in a blink and you'll miss it moment in the background of Deadpool and Wolverine, with a version that is supposed to be a little Easter egg for the 2003 Daredevil version. And he's obviously in Daredevil Born Again Season 1 where he kills Foggy, and he'll be back in Season 2. Felix Manning appears in 7 episodes throughout Daredevil Season 3, played by Joe Jones. He is first mentioned in episodes 3 and 4 before making an appearance in episode 5. And making appearances is in most episodes all the way until the series finale in Season 3, Episode 13. In the show, he's a fixer for Fisk, dealing with a lot of things. He very much is kind of like the Wesley of this season in a lot of ways. He makes threats to Karen early on. He's the one who tells Fisk that he could use Melvin Potter to make a Daredevil suit. He handles Poindexter at various points. He's the one who arranges the murder of Julie, the woman that Poindexter is in love with. And he's also the one who is heavily involved with putting Raina Deem on Kingpin's corrupt FBI list. To be honest, if there was some shit that Fisk was into in Season 3, it was probably Felix Manning who did it. In the comics, he was super briefly in Daredevil for 2 issues in 1986 during the Born Again arc, being the person persuading Melvin Potter to make a Daredevil costume, or Betsy gets it. When Nuke started terrorizing New York on Fisk's say-so, Felix was killed. Again, these writers, they love deep cuts. Next up, we have one of the smallest characters we've talked about today, both in the comics and in the show. Michael only showed up in Season 3, Episode 4, being played by Luke Robertson, and in this episode, he's an inmate at Rikers Island that Foggy and Matt represented at some point during the show, helping him get 16 years off of his sentence. So Matt comes to visit him using Foggy's ID, looking for information on Fisk and the Albanians. Being scared of those questions, though, putting him in danger, Michael punches Matt and swears to the Albanians that he didn't say anything. In the comics, Michael Kemp has only ever appeared in Daredevil issue 231 from early 1986, right in the middle of the Born Again arc, which is fitting with Season 3 being based on that. In the comic, he's a hitman who tried to kill Karen and her drug dealer, Paulo Scorsese. The NYPD try to arrest him, and he dies. Outside of Daredevil, he actually does get a really cool mention in episode 3 of Hawkeye, where he's listed in the criminal database of Bishop Security. That's Michael Kemp. Rosalie Carbone is another minor character in the show, the leader of the Carbone family. She appears in 2 episodes from Season 3, Episodes 9 and Episodes 13. In Episode 9, she's one of the many big crime-related people in New York City that's picked up by Fisk's FBI agents and brought to a meeting where Fisk makes sure everybody knows he's in charge now. In Episode 13, she returns again at his wedding to Vanessa. She slyly leaves the wedding before Bullseye shows up, and it's possible in my opinion that she was being set up here for a much bigger role in Season 4. In the comics, she's a Punisher character from the 90s, first showing up in the Punisher Warzone in issue 2 in 1992. She's a mob boss's daughter who falls in love with a man that she does not realize is Frank Castle in disguise. Punisher's war on crime and all of the crime families does eventually heavily affect her, though, which forces her to hire assassins to go after Frank, and then she narrowly avoids being killed by him due to luck a few times. She doesn't stay around in comics for long. When a rival family has hired Punisher, she meets with Frank and is assassinated by a member of the crime family that Frank's working for. She actually showed up in the Marvel Netflix universe before Daredevil, believe it or not. She appeared in 2 episodes of Luke Cage Season 2, episodes 12 and 13, where she was a longtime enemy of Mariah Stokes and the Stokes family. She ends up being prepared to fall in line under Luke Cage's new rule over the criminal elements of his part of New York, and that's where we lead into Season 3 of Daredevil. How awesome would it have been to see how Luke Cage was taking to Kingpin's attempt to take over New York? Anyway, that's the only time the Rosalie Carbone appeared outside of the comics. I feel like with her appearance in Luke Cage Season 2 and Daredevil Season 3, she was kind of being teased for something bigger. I don't know though, we'll never know. Next up is Kenji Oyama, who was an extremely minor character in Season 3 of the Netflix series, who only appeared once in the show, and it was in the final scene of the entire show, played by Glenn Kubota. Kenji Oyama was a surgeon operating on Bullseye after his back was broken, and it's possible that this scene was a little bit of a setup for the character to have a much more substantial role in Season 4, which is kind of the thing for a lot of these minor characters in Season 3. I feel like they were being set up to do more next season. In the comics, Kenji is a supervillain known as Lord Darkwind, a pretty obscure villain who just has a pretty brief stint in Marvel Comics in the 80s. A Daredevil villain that first showed up in issue 196 from March 1983, where he meets Wilson Fisk and wants to work with him. So Fisk sends him after none other than Wolverine. Fisk also gives Darkwind what's left of Bullseye, wanting him to use adamantium on him to make him into a peak assassin. He accomplishes this in issue 197. And in issue 198, Matt contacts Ben Urich for information on him, which is when Matt finds out his name and that he's Darkwind. Ben also tells him that he was a Japanese kamikaze pilot in World War II and to avoid him at all costs. Darkwind sees that his process has created a psychic link between Daredevil and Bullseye and wants to use it against the hero. The first face-off between the two characters comes from issue 199 in late 1983. Daredevil has followed Kenji to Japan, knowing he's doing something with Bullseye. He then reveals to Bullseye why he wears his mask, saying that he won't remove it until Japan is righteous once again. Darkwind and Daredevil fight, and Darkwind's daughter reveals herself, Lady Deathstrike, who is a huge Wolverine character, and she's been helping Matt for the past few issues, and she saves Matt's life and kills her father. Lord Darkwind does make some very minor appearances in a few issues after this, but all in flashbacks related to his daughter. Outside of the comics, Lord Darkwind actually did show up in X-Men the Animated Series, where he appears in 3 episodes as Kenji Oyama, the Professor, and the father of Lady Deathstrike. He's in Season 2 Episode 5, Season 3 Episode 1, and Season 3 Episode 19, where he is voiced by David Calderisi. And besides that, it's just his cameo in 2015's Daredevil. And there you have it. Every single comic book character in Daredevil. It's this video. It took forever. It took so long. Like look how much go back to the start of this video and look how much my beard has grown out as I've been making this. Like, it's crazy. Like, there was an insane amount of work that went into making this. Easily the most effort that I've put into a video on this channel. So if you enjoyed this video at all, please show it some love. Because if this video doesn't do reasonably okay, there definitely will be not another one like this on the channel, at least not anytime soon. But I would love to tackle Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Probably would have to split it into like half and half with like the first couple seasons and then the rest of the show. Same with, I think, any show going past 3 seasons. If I try a video for this again, I will need to split into like half of the show and half of the show. Because I did not expect a Daredevil one with only 3 seasons, with a show that does not feel like on the surface it has a whole lot of extra comic book characters. When you look into them, a lot of the characters that they have cameos are one-off characters from a certain era of the comics, which shows how much the writers love the source material. Like, if anything, this video made me appreciate the effort that those writers must have went to research and read the old comics. Like, I really respect that. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, if you even made it this far. If you did, as always, like, share, subscribe, comment. Would really appreciate it, especially on this video, far more than any other video. I think this is the video I would love for you to share and to comment on and to like and to subscribe. If you're not, I don't know why you would watch this far if you're not subscribed already, but thank you so much for watching all of this, for listening to me talk for 3 hours. If that somehow didn't piss you off before now, it pissed me off hearing myself, and I gotta edit the damn thing. But I hope you have an unbelievably amazing day. Thank you so much.